The morning fog rolled thick across Naval Station San Diego, turning the world into shades of gray and uncertainty. Gate 7, the main visitor entrance, hummed with its usual controlled chaos. Civilian contractors flashed badges. Delivery trucks idled in inspection lanes, and tourists clutching visitor passes gawked at the warships visible through the mist. Among them walked a woman who seemed to belong nowhere and everywhere at once. She wore faded jeans, a plain black jacket, zipped halfway, and worn hiking boots that had seen better days. Her dark hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry except for a thin silver chain barely visible at her neck. She carried a small duffel bag over one shoulder, the kind you could buy at any surplus store for $20. To the Marines manning the security checkpoint, she looked like another veteran visiting for a DOD reunion, or maybe a contractor arriving for a maintenance job. Unremarkable. Forgettable. Exactly what she intended. Her name was Captain Rachel Vance, though the ID she carried said something different. At 42 years old, she had spent the last 6 months living in carefully constructed anonymity. Moving through the shadows of the military world she had once commanded with quiet, unshakable authority. Rachel joined the line at the pedestrian gate, standing behind a nervous-looking civilian contractor and ahead of 2 college students clutching photography equipment. She kept her fading whirs, hands visible, her posture relaxed, her eyes forward. But anyone trained to read body language would have noticed the subtle tells that marked her as something other than ordinary. Her weight distribution was too balanced, too ready. Her scan of the environment was too systematic, too complete. And, when a car backfired in the parking lot behind her, she didn't jump or flinch. She simply shifted her gaze, assessed, and dismissed the sound in less than a second. The Marine corporal at the checkpoint was young, maybe 23, with the crisp bearing of someone still new enough to care deeply about every regulation. His name tape read Morrison, and he processed each visitor with methodical precision. Next, he called out. Rachel stepped forward and handed him her ID card. It identified her as Rachel M. Chen, civilian DoD contractor, clearance level unspecified. Morrison scanned the card, frowned slightly at his computer screen, then looked up at her. "Purpose of visit, ma'am?" "Meeting with Admiral Garrett's staff," Rachel said simply. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying the kind of quiet confidence that came from years of giving orders that were never questioned. Morrison's frown deepened. "I don't see you on the appointment list." "It was arranged yesterday evening," Rachel replied. "Check the late editions." The corporal clicked through several screens, his expression growing more skeptical with each passing second. Behind Rachel, the line was beginning to back up. A contractor checking his watch, the college students whispering to each other. "Ma'am, I'm not finding anything," Morrison said. "And this ID, the system is flagging it as requiring additional verification." Rachel had expected this. The ID was real enough to pass initial screening, but designed to trigger secondary checks. It was part of the test, part of the reason she was here. "Then verify it," she said simply. Morrison hesitated, then reached for his radio. "Sergeant Kowalski, I need a supervisor at Gate 7. Before we continue, make sure to subscribe to military and veteran stories so you never miss these true tales of courage. And tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today?" Within 2 minutes, a staff sergeant appeared. Maria Kowalski was 38, a career Marine with deployment ribbons that told stories of Iraq, Afghanistan, and places that didn't appear on official maps. Her dark eyes assessed Rachel with the kind of thorough evaluation that missed nothing. "What's the issue, Morrison?" Kowalski asked. "This civilian's ID is flagging for additional verification, and she's not on any appointment list." Morrison explained. "She claims she has a meeting with Admiral Garrett's staff." Kowalski took the ID card and studied it, then studied Rachel. Something in her gaze shifted. A flicker of recognition that wasn't about the ID or the appointment list. It was about bearing, about presence, about something deeper that one combat veteran recognized in another. "Ma'am," Kowalski said carefully, "can you provide any additional documentation, Orders? Email confirmation? Anything? Rachel reached into her jacket pocket slowly, her movements deliberate to avoid alarming anyone. She pulled out a folded piece of paper and handed it to Kowalski. The sergeant unfolded it and read. Her eyebrows rose slightly. The email was from a commander in Admiral Garrett's office, confirming a 0900 meeting regarding Project Lighthouse, a designation that meant nothing to anyone without specific clearance. This looks legitimate, Kowalski said. But I still need to verify with the Admiral's office before I can. Is there a problem here, Sergeant? The voice came from behind them, sharp with authority and irritation. A Navy commander strode toward the checkpoint, his uniform immaculate, his bearing radiating the kind of self-importance that came from years of being the smartest person in every room he entered. Commander Derek Hastings was 45 years old and convinced he was destined for flag rank. He served as Admiral Garrett's chief of staff, a position he wielded like a weapon against anyone he perceived as wasting his time or the Admiral's. Sir, Kowalski said, straightening slightly, we're just verifying this visitor's credentials. She has a meeting scheduled with. I know every meeting on the Admiral's calendar. Hastings interrupted, his eyes sliding over Rachel with undisguised dismissal. And there's nothing scheduled with. He glanced at the ID card in Kowalski's hand. A civilian contractor I've never heard of. Rachel met his gaze steadily, saying nothing. Her silence seemed to irritate him further. Ma'am, Hastings said, his tone dripping with condescension, I don't know what you think you're doing here, but Admiral Garrett is a very busy man. We don't have time for random civilians showing up claiming to have meetings that don't exist. The meeting exists, Rachel said quietly. Perhaps you should check with Commander Mitchell in your office. Hastings' jaw tightened. I don't need to check with anyone. I am the Admiral's chief of staff. If there was a meeting, I would know about it. Behind Rachel, the line had grown to more than a dozen people. Several were pulling out phones, some taking pictures, others texting about the delay. A junior officer in the line muttered something about typical gate security drama. Sir, Kowalski tried again. If we could just make a quick call to verify. No, Hastings snapped. What we're going to do is escort this woman off the base for attempting to gain unauthorized access. He turned to Morrison. Corporal, call the MPs. Have her detained for questioning. Rachel's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her dark eyes. Not fear. Not anger. Something colder, more patient, like a predator watching prey dig themselves deeper into a trap. That won't be necessary, she said softly. Oh, I think it is, Hastings replied, stepping closer. In fact, I think we need to have a very serious conversation about how you obtained that contractor ID and why you're trying to impersonate someone with DoD clearance. Morrison was already on his radio. MP Station, this is Gate 7, we need officers for a potential security breach. Civilian, attempting unauthorized access, with questionable credentials. Rachel slowly lowered her duffel bag to the ground, her movements careful and controlled. Several Marines tensed, hands drifting toward their sidearms. She raised both hands, slightly, palms visible, showing she was no threat. Commander Hastings, she said, her voice still calm, but carrying an edge now. I strongly suggest you make that phone call. I don't take suggestions from civilians. Hastings shot back. Especially ones who show up at my gate with fake IDs, fabricated stories about meetings that don't exist. 2 MPs arrived within 3 minutes. Their patrol vehicle pulling up with lights flashing. Lieutenant James Park and Petty Officer First Class David Chen emerged, both looking alert but confused about what exactly they were responding to. What's the situation? Park asked, his hand resting on his duty belt. This woman attempted to gain access to the base using fraudulent credentials. Hastings explained, his voice carrying across the checkpoint. More people were stopping now, watching the scene unfold. Phones were definitely recording. She claims to have a meeting with Admiral Garrett that doesn't exist. I want her detained and questioned. Park looked at Rachel, then at the ID card Kowalski still held. Ma'am, is this your identification? It is, Rachel confirmed. And you're claiming to be a DoD contractor with Sundo clearance to access this installation? I'm not claiming anything, Rachel said carefully. That ID is valid. The meeting is real. And if you detain me, you're going to create a situation that Commander Hastings will deeply regret. The warning in her voice was subtle but unmistakable. Park heard it. So did Chen. Even Kowalski's expression shifted slightly, a growing unease replacing her initial professionalism, but Hastings heard only defiance. That sounds like a threat, he said loudly. Lieutenant, I want this woman in handcuffs. Now. Park hesitated. Something about the whole situation felt wrong. The woman was too calm, too controlled. She wasn't acting like someone caught in a lie. She was acting like someone waiting for other people to realize their mistake. Ma'am, Park said slowly, I'm going to need you to turn around and place your hands behind your back. Rachel looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she complied. The sound of the handcuffs clicking shut echoed across the checkpoint like a gunshot. The holding room at the MP station was exactly what Rachel had expected. Gray walls, fluorescent lighting, a metal table bolted to the floor, and 2 chairs that had seen better days. One-way mirror on the far wall. Camera in the corner, red light blinking steadily. She sat calmly, hands folded on the table in front of her. The handcuffs now removed. They had processed her politely but firmly, taking her duffel bag, photographing her ID, and logging her detention with the kind of bureaucratic precision the military excelled at. Commander Hastings had followed them to the MP station, clearly intending to be present for whatever interrogation was coming. He stood outside the holding room now, visible through the small window in the door, talking animatedly with Lieutenant Park. Rachel could hear muffled voices but not specific words. She didn't need to. She knew exactly what was happening. Hastings was insisting she was a security threat. Park was trying to follow proper procedure while dealing with an officer who outranked him. And, somewhere in the background, someone was finally making the phone calls that should have been made 20 minutes ago. The door opened. Park entered alone, carrying a folder and a tablet. He sat down across from Rachel, his expression professional but troubled. Ma'am, he began. I need to ask you some questions. Of course, Rachel said. Let's start with your name. Your real name, Rachel Vance. Park made a note. And the ID you were carrying identifies you as Rachel Chen. That's correct. So you're admitting the ID is fraudulent? No, Rachel said simply. The ID is entirely legitimate. It was issued through proper DoD channels, for a specific purpose. Park frowned. What purpose? I'm not at liberty to discuss that. Ma'am, you were arrested for attempting to access a military installation using questionable credentials. You're going to need to be more forthcoming. Rachel met his gaze steadily. Lieutenant Park, I understand you're doing your job. But you need to understand something. Every second you keep me in this room, this situation gets worse for the people who put me here. Outside, Commander Hastings was pacing, checking his watch, radiating impatience. Another officer had joined him, a junior lieutenant from Admiral Garrett's staff, who looked increasingly nervous. Park tried again. The email you provided mentions Project Lighthouse. What is that? Classified. You claim to have a meeting with Admiral Garrett's office. I do. But Commander Hastings, who manages the Admiral's entire schedule, has never heard of you. Rachel allowed herself a small smile. That's because Commander Hastings wasn't supposed to know about the meeting. Park sat back, studying her. Ma'am, that doesn't make any sense. It makes perfect sense. Lieutenant, you're just asking the wrong people the right questions. The door opened again. Hastings strode in, his patience clearly exhausted. Lieutenant, I need to speak with the detainee. Park stood, looking uncomfortable. Sir, I haven't finished my initial questioning. You've had 20 minutes. I'll take it from here. Hastings's tone made it clear this wasn't a request. Park hesitated, then nodded and left the room. The door closed with a solid thunk. Hastings remained standing, looming over Rachel in a deliberate display of dominance. "Let me make something very clear, Miss Chen, or Vance, or whatever your real name is. I've served in the Navy for 23 years. I've been Admiral Garrett's Chief of Staff for 3 years. I know every operation, every project, every meeting that happens in his office. And I have never, not once, heard of Project Lighthouse, or what you." Rachel said nothing. "So either you're a very good con artist," Hastings continued, "or you're working for someone who thinks they can bypass proper channels and protocol. Either way, you're not getting anywhere near the Admiral." "Commander," Rachel said quietly. "Have you called Commander Mitchell yet?" Hastings's jaw clenched. "Mitchell is not in the office today. He's on leave. Which is probably why you picked today to try this stunt. Actually, Mitchell had been pulled into a classified briefing at 0800. But Rachel didn't correct him. She simply waited. "Here's what's going to happen," Hastings said, leaning forward with both hands on the table. "You're going to tell me exactly who sent you here, what you were really trying to accomplish, and why you thought you could waltz onto a Navy base with fake credentials. And then you're going to be charged with trespassing, fraud, and potentially espionage, depending on what we find when we dig into your background." "Espionage," Rachel repeated, her tone neutral. "That's quite an escalation, Commander. You're a civilian with no legitimate business here, carrying an ID that raises red flags, claiming to have classified meetings that don't exist. What else would you call it?" Rachel tilted her head slightly. "I'd call it a field exercise. One that you're currently failing." Hastings' face flushed. "Excuse me? You heard me." The tension in the room ratcheted up instantly. Hastings straightened, his hands balling into fists at his sides. "You think this is a joke? You think you can insult me while you're sitting in an MP holding room, facing federal charges?" "Re-seen, I think," Rachel said calmly, "that you're so concerned with protecting your authority and your admiral's time that you haven't stopped to consider why a woman with legitimate DoD credentials, a verified email from someone in your own office, and absolutely no resistance to being detained would walk into your gate and let herself be arrested." Hastings stared at her, his mind visibly working through the implications. "Let me help you," Rachel continued. "I'm here because Admiral Garrett requested an evaluation of his base's security protocols. Specifically, he wanted to know if his Chief of Staff would recognize a high-level threat or simply react with ego when challenged." "That's ridiculous," Hastings snapped. "The Admiral would have told me if, quote." "Would he?" Rachel interrupted gently. "If the entire point was to test whether you could recognize something unusual and handle it with intelligence rather than arrogance, why would he warn you first?" Hastings's expression shifted from anger to uncertainty, something close to panic. "You're lying." "Am I?" "Admiral Garrett would never authorize something like this without my knowledge. Commander, the entire military conducts surprise inspections, red team exercises, and security audits. Why would the Admiral's office be any different?" "Because Hastings stopped himself, the words dying on his lips. "Because he was in charge. Because he controlled access. Because nothing happened in that office without his approval. Except, apparently, this." Rachel watched him process it, saw the moment the certainty cracked, and doubt seeped in. His eyes darted to the one-way mirror, probably wondering who was watching from the other side. His hand went to his pocket, checking for his phone. "I'm calling Admiral Garrett," he said finally. "You should have done that 30 minutes ago," Rachel replied. Hastings pulled out his phone and dialed. The call connected almost immediately, but Rachel could only hear Hastings's side of the conversation. "Sir, I apologize for disturbing you, but we have a situation at Gate 7. "Yes, sir. A civilian was detained, attempting to access the base with questionable credentials. Her name is Rachel Vance, though she's also using the name Chen. She claims to have a meeting about something called Project Lighthouse." Hastings's face went through a remarkable transformation. First confusion, then shock, then something approaching horror. "Yes, sir. I understand, sir." She's currently in MP holding. She was handcuffed and... Yes, sir, I ordered it. I thought. Sir, she didn't have proper... Yes, sir. Right away, sir. He ended the call. His hand was shaking. Rachel waited. He wants to see you immediately, Hastings said, his voice hollow. You're to be released and escorted directly to his office. Thank you, Commander, he also said. Hastings swallowed hard. That we'll be discussing my handling of this situation later today. Rachel stood slowly, watching the reality settle over him. For what it's worth, Commander, you followed protocol. You were protecting your Admiral and your base. But you let your ego make you blind to other possibilities. Who are you? Hastings asked quietly. Someone who was testing your security, Rachel said. And someone you should have questioned more carefully before having arrested. The door opened. Lieutenant Park stood there, looking pale. Behind him, Master Chief Petty Officer Sarah Rodriguez had arrived. Her expression carefully neutral, but her eyes sharp with understanding. Ma'am, Rodriguez said respectfully, if you'll come with me, we'll escort you to Admiral Garrett's office. As Rachel walked out of the holding room, she caught a glimpse of her reflection in the one-way mirror. Same plain clothes, same simple appearance. But now every person in that MP station was looking at her differently. Behind her, Commander Hastings stood alone in the interrogation room, finally making the phone calls. He should have made the moment she appeared at his gate. And somewhere in the background, security footage of the entire incident was being reviewed by people whose job was to identify exactly the kind of systemic failures that had just occurred. Rachel allowed herself a small, satisfied smile as she walked through the MP station. The test had only just begun. The walk from the MP station to Admiral Garrett's office took 12 minutes, giving Rachel plenty of time to observe the base's operations and letting everyone observe her in return. Master Chief Rodriguez led the way with professional courtesy. But Rachel could feel the weight of dozens of eyes tracking their progress. Word had already spread. That was inevitable in a military environment where gossip moved faster than official communications. The woman who'd been arrested at Gate 7 was being personally escorted to the Admiral's office. Speculation rippled through every group they passed. Must be someone important. Maybe she's a federal investigator. I heard she threatened Commander Hastings. No way. I heard she worked for the CIA. Rachel kept her expression neutral, but she was cataloging everything. The security postures at various checkpoints. The way personnel moved between buildings. The gaps in coverage, where someone with bad intentions could exploit vulnerabilities. They passed a group of young sailors doing maintenance work on a communications array. One of them, a petty officer third class with the name Jackson on his uniform, did a double take as Rachel walked by. His eyes widened slightly, his mouth opening as if to say something, then closing again. He watched her pass with an expression Rachel recognized instantly, confusion mixed with recognition. He thought he knew her from somewhere but couldn't place where. Master Chief Rodriguez noticed the interaction. "Do you know Petty Officer Jackson, ma'am?" "No," Rachel said. "But he might have seen my face before." Rodriguez processed that cryptic answer without comment, though her interest was clearly piqued. They entered the administration building, passing through another security checkpoint, where Rachel's identity was verified against a list that she apparently now appeared on. The sailors manning the desk treated her with noticeably more respect than the Marines at Gate 7 had, though she wore the same civilian clothes and carried no obvious credentials. As they waited for the elevator, a Navy captain emerged from a nearby conference room, tablet in hand, moving with the distracted efficiency of someone juggling too many priorities. Captain Michael Foster, based on his name tag, stopped short when he saw Rachel. His eyes narrowed. He studied her face for several long seconds, then glanced at Master Chief Rodriguez. "Master Chief," Foster said carefully, "is this the visitor from Gate 7? "Yes, sir," Rodriguez confirmed. Foster turned back to Rachel, his expression thoughtful. "I apologize for what happened at the gate, ma'am. There seems to have been a breakdown in communication." "No apology necessary, Captain. Rachel replied. The personnel at Gate 7 were following proper protocol. Still, being handcuffed and detained is hardly appropriate treatment for he paused, seeming to catch himself. Well, for any legitimate visitor. Rachel noticed the pause. Captain Foster knew something, but he was being careful not to reveal it. Captain, she said quietly. If I can ask, have we met before? Foster smiled slightly. No, ma'am. But I attended a briefing about 3 months ago where your photograph was shown. Threat assessment training. Various scenarios involving high-level security tests. Your face was used as an example of someone who might not be what they appear. Rodriguez's eyebrows rose fractionally. Rachel simply nodded. That must have been an interesting briefing, Rachel said. It was, Foster confirmed. Though I don't think anyone expected the theoretical to become practical quite so soon. He glanced at his watch. The Admiral is expecting you. I won't keep you. As Foster walked away, Rodriguez led Rachel to the elevator. Once the doors closed, and they were alone, the Master Chief spoke quietly. Ma'am, I need to ask, are you actually a DoD contractor? Rachel looked at her. What do you think? Master Chief. Rodriguez studied her with the kind of assessment that came from 26 years of reading people and situations. I think contractors don't usually rate personal escorts from the Admiral's office. I think they don't usually trigger recognition from officers who've seen their photo in classified briefings. And I think they definitely don't walk through MP detention with that kind of composure. Sharp observation, Rachel said. So who are you really? Someone doing a job, Rachel replied. The question you should be asking is why that job required me to be arrested and detained before anyone took me seriously. The elevator doors opened on the fourth floor. The hallway was quieter here, carpeted, with the kind of subdued professionalism that marked flag officer territory. 2 armed Marines stood outside the Admiral's suite, their bearing immaculate. As Rachel approached with Rodriguez, both Marines came to attention. The senior of the 2, a staff sergeant with a chest full of ribbons, watched Rachel with undisguised curiosity. Master Chief Rodriguez with Miss Vance for Admiral Garrett, Rodriguez announced formally. The staff sergeant nodded and opened the door, but his eyes never left Rachel's face. She caught the moment the expression changed, a flicker of something that looked almost like recognition, though he gave no other indication. Inside, Commander Hastings was waiting in the outer office, his earlier arrogance completely gone. He stood quickly when Rachel entered. Ma'am, he said stiffly, the Admiral will see you now. I've been instructed to apologize for any inconvenience. Accepted, Commander, Rachel said simply. Hastings's jaw worked as if he wanted to say more, but he simply gestured toward the inner office door. Rachel nodded to Rodriguez and walked forward. Admiral Jonathan Garrett's office was exactly what she'd expected. American flag in the corner, Navy flag beside it, model ships on shelves, photographs from various deployments and ceremonies covering one wall. A massive desk that somehow managed to look both organized and overwhelmed with the weight of command. Responsibility. The Admiral himself stood as she entered, 58 years old, gray hair cut military short. Eyes that had seen combat and politics and the complex machinery that kept the world's most powerful navy operating. He wore his service dress blues, ribbons telling a story of a career spent at sea and in the Pentagon's corridors of power. But what caught Rachel's attention was his expression. Admiral Garrett was smiling, but it was the rueful smile of someone who'd just learned a hard lesson. Captain Vance, he said, his voice carrying command authority even in greeting. Welcome aboard. Though I understand the welcome was less than ideal, Rachel came to attention automatically, muscle memory from decades of service overriding her civilian clothes. Sir. At ease, Garrett said, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. Please. Sit. And I owe you an apology. Rachel sat, but her posture remained straight. No apology necessary, Admiral. The test went exactly as designed. Did it? Garrett asked, returning to his own chair. Because from where I'm sitting, My chief of staff just had a decorated Navy captain arrested at my front gate. And it took 30 minutes before anyone bothered to make a phone call that would have resolved the entire situation in 60 seconds. Which was precisely the point of the exercise, Rachel replied. You wanted to know if your security protocols would identify a sophisticated threat or if they would be blinded by assumptions about appearance, gender, and civilian status. Garrett leaned back, his expression troubled. And the answer is clearly the latter. With respect, sir, the answer is more nuanced than that. Your gate personnel followed proper procedure. They checked ID, verified against appointment lists, and escalated to a supervisor when something didn't match. The breakdown came from Commander Hastings, who assumed a woman in civilian clothes couldn't possibly be important enough to warrant his attention, Garrett said. Yes, sir. The Admiral was quiet for a moment, his eyes studying Rachel with the kind of thorough evaluation that missed very little. You've done this before, haven't you? These security audits. Many times, sir. Though usually I don't end up in handcuffs. Usually. There was an incident in Bahrain, Rachel said with the ghost of a smile. A colonel who was very convinced I was a journalist trying to infiltrate his compound. What happened? He ended up reassigned to a desk job in Kansas. Garrett winced. I'm sensing Commander Hastings' career might be facing a similar adjustment. Rachel leaned forward slightly. Sir, if I may, Commander Hastings is good at his job. He's protective of your time, your authority, and your security. He made a mistake today, but it was a mistake born from exactly the qualities that make him valuable. He just needs better training in recognizing when his assumptions might be wrong. The Admiral studied her with new appreciation. You're defending the man who had you arrested? I'm defending a good officer who had a bad day, Rachel replied. The goal here isn't to end careers. It's to identify vulnerabilities so they can be fixed. Garrett nodded slowly. Point taken. He opened a folder on his desk. Your full report won't be due for another week, but give me the preliminary assessment. How bad is it? Rachel pulled a small notebook from her jacket pocket. Gate security protocols are solid. Your Marine and Navy personnel followed procedure correctly. The weakness is in the human element, specifically in how authority figures respond to ambiguity. Elaborate. Commander Hastings, Captain Foster, even Lieutenant Park at the MP station. They all had access to information that could have resolved this situation quickly. But Hastings was too focused on control to weathermater, see the bigger picture. Foster recognized me but didn't interfere, presumably not wanting to step on the Chief of Staff's toes. Park followed orders from a superior officer even though his instincts were telling him something was off. Garrett's expression darkened. So we have a command climate problem. You have a common military problem. Rachel corrected. Respect for chain of command is essential, but it can create blind spots when junior personnel are afraid to question senior decisions or when senior personnel are too ego-invested to admit they might be wrong. The Admiral stood and walked to his window, looking out over the base. This was supposed to be a simple exercise. Test the gates. Test the ID verification systems. Maybe expose a few procedural gaps. I didn't expect it to reveal fundamental issues in my command structure. Sir, every base I've tested has the same issues, Rachel said quietly. It's not a reflection on your leadership. It's a reflection of military culture as a whole. Garrett turned back to her. Which is exactly why the CNO authorized these audits in the first place. He returned to his desk. Captain Vance, I've read your service record. 24 years, most of it in intelligence and special operations. 3 combat deployments. Naval Intelligence Officer of the Year twice. And then you retired 2 years ago, at the rank of 06. Yes, sir. Except you didn't really retire, did you? You just moved into a different kind of service. Rachel allowed herself a small smile. I got tired of the desk work, sir. This gives me a chance to stay active and actually make a difference. By letting yourself be arrested and humiliated. By exposing vulnerabilities before they're exploited by actual threats. Rachel corrected. Sir, the methodology I use today, Showing up in civilian clothes with questionable credentials and a plausible story. That's exactly how foreign intelligence services infiltrate secure facilities. The only difference is I'm on your side. Garrett sat back down, his expression thoughtful. The gate incident will be all over the base by this afternoon. Every sailor and Marine will know that Commander Hastings had someone arrested who turned out to be legitimate. Yes, sir. That kind of embarrassment could undermine his authority. Rachel nodded. Which is why I recommend you use this as a teaching moment for the entire command. Don't hide what happened. Own it. Have Commander Hastings brief the staff on what went wrong and what he learned. Turn his mistake into everyone's lesson. The Admiral considered this. That could work. It would take courage on his part. He strikes me as someone who has plenty of courage, sir. He just needs to learn when to apply it to questioning his own assumptions rather than defending them. Garrett looked at her with newfound respect. You're not just here to test security, are you? You're here to test leadership. They're inseparable, sir. A knock at the door interrupted them. Garrett called, "Enter." Commander Mitchell stepped in, carrying a tablet and looking apologetic. "Sir, I apologize for the delay. I was in the skiff for the morning briefing, and just saw the messages about." He stopped short when he saw Rachel. "Oh, you're already here. Thanks to an interesting detour through MP detention," Garrett said dryly. Mitchell paled. "Sir, I am so sorry. I should have coordinated better with Commander Hastings. I assumed he'd check the late additions to the schedule. He assumed you'd tell him about anything important," Garrett interrupted. "Which brings us right back to the communication problems this audit was designed to expose." He stood. "Commander Mitchell, Captain Vance will need access to base facilities for the rest of the week. Make sure she has proper credentials this time. And arrange a meeting with all department heads for tomorrow morning. I want everyone who played a role in today's incident present." "Yes, sir," Mitchell said, his mind clearly already working through the logistics. Garrett turned back to Rachel. "Captain, is there anything else you need?" Rachel stood. "Actually, sir, there is one thing. My sleeve rode up during the detention. A few people may have seen my tattoo. I'd prefer to keep that particular detail quiet for now." The Admiral's eyebrows rose. "Your tattoo?" Rachel pulled up her left sleeve, revealing the edge of intricate ink work. A navy anchor intertwined with an eagle. Wings spread. But it wasn't the standard Navy eagle. The design was subtly different, carrying specific symbolism that only certain personnel would recognize. Mitchell's breath caught. "Is that Naval Special Warfare?" Rachel confirmed, pulling her sleeve back. "Down. Specifically, SEAL Team Reconnaissance Support. I spent 8 years attached to various SEAL teams doing intelligence and operational planning." Garrett's expression shifted from respect to something approaching awe. "You worked with the teams?" "Yes, sir. Which is why, when Petty Officer Jackson saw me earlier, he reacted. He couldn't place where he knew my face from, but somewhere in his memory, he's seen it in a team briefing or on deployment." "Will he connect the dots?" Mitchell asked. "Eventually," Rachel said. "But by then, the audit will be complete. The question is whether anyone else spots it first, and what they do with that information." Garrett nodded slowly. "Another test. Every moment is a test, sir. The question is whether we're paying attention to the lessons." As Rachel left the Admiral's office, properly credentialed now and no longer under suspicion, she could feel the shift in how people looked at her. She was no longer just a civilian who'd been detained. She was someone the Admiral had personally met with for over an hour. Someone Commander Mitchell now treated with careful respect. But she was still wearing the same plain clothes. Still carrying the same worn duffel bag. Still looking like someone who shouldn't matter. And that was exactly the point. The real test was just beginning. Rachel spent the next 3 hours moving through the base like a ghost, documenting security procedures, observing personnel interactions, and noting the subtle ways information flowed through the command structure. Commander Mitchell had provided her with a proper visitor badge now, one that granted access to most non-classified spaces. But she deliberately kept her appearance unchanged. Same civilian clothes, same unassuming demeanor. The reactions were fascinating. Some personnel, having heard about the morning's incident, treated her with cautious respect. Others, unaware of who she was, barely noticed her presence. A few seemed suspicious, watching her movements with the wariness of people who understood that something unusual was happening but couldn't quite figure out what. By 1300 hours, Rachel was in Building 17, observing the base communications center. It was a hub of activity, sailors and contractors working side by side, monitoring systems that connected Naval Station San Diego to ships at sea, other bases, and Pentagon command structures. The security here was supposedly airtight. That's what she was here to verify. She stood in the observation gallery, overlooking the main floor, making notes on her tablet. Below, dozens of workstations hummed with activity. Radio chatter, keyboard clicks, the occasional, called-out status update. It was controlled chaos, the kind of organized complexity that kept a major naval installation functioning. A young petty officer second class noticed her in the gallery. His name tape read Torres, and he had the kind of eager efficiency that marked someone relatively new to their posting, but determined to excel. "Ma'am, can I help you?" Torres asked, climbing the stairs to the observation level. Rachel showed her visitor badge. "Just observing. Commander Mitchell authorized my access." Torres studied the badge, then her face, then back to the badge. Something clicked in his expression. "You're the one from this morning. The contractor they arrested at Gate 7. Word really did travel fast." "That's me," Rachel confirmed. "But you're not actually a contractor, are you?" Torres said, his voice dropping. "I heard Captain Foster telling someone you were doing some kind of security audit." "Did he?" Rachel kept her tone neutral, but she was impressed. Information was leaking exactly as it would in any real scenario. "What else did you hear?" Torres glanced around to make sure no one else was listening. "That Commander Hastings is in deep trouble for having you arrested. That Admiral Garrett personally apologized. And that you used to work with the SEAL teams." Rachel's eyebrows rose. That last part got around quickly. Petty Officer Jackson told a few people he thought he recognized you from his last deployment. Said you looked like an intel officer he'd worked with in Afghanistan. Torres paused. "Is that true?" Before Rachel could answer, an alarm blared through the building. Not the sharp klaxon of a fire alarm or emergency evacuation, but a steady, pulsing tone that meant something specific in naval communications. Every head in the operations center snapped toward the sound. The ambient noise level dropped instantly as trained personnel shifted from routine operations to focused alert status. A chief petty officer's voice boomed across the floor. "OPREP 3. We have an OPREP 3 event. All personnel to stations. OPREP 3. Operational Report 3 Pinnacle." The designation used for significant events requiring immediate attention from higher command. Rachel's pulse quickened as she watched the response unfold below her. Torres was already moving toward the stairs. "Ma'am, I need to go," Rachel said. "Do your job." She stayed in the observation gallery, watching as the operations center transformed. Personnel who had been working on routine tasks abandoned them, bringing up new displays, establishing communication links, coordinating with other facilities. The organized chaos became simply chaos, the kind that happened when something unexpected hit a system that wasn't quite ready for it. Rachel's trained eye caught the problems immediately. 3 workstations on the left side were trying to access the same secure network simultaneously, creating a bottleneck. 2 junior sailors near the back were looking around uncertainly, clearly unsure of their roles in an OPREP 3 response. And the senior officer in charge, a lieutenant commander whose name tape identified him as Bradley, was barking orders but not coordinating them, creating confusion rather than clarity. A voice came over the overhead speakers. "All personnel, this is not a drill. We have a confirmed distress signal from USS Halsey, DDG 97. Ship has lost primary communications and is operating on emergency backup only. Last known position approximately 120 nautical miles west of San Diego. Weather conditions are deteriorating. Multiple vessels are responding, but coordination is being hampered by communication failures across the affected area. Rachel's mind snapped into a different mode. USS Halsey was an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, one of the Navy's most capable surface combatants. For it to lose primary communications meant something catastrophic had occurred. And if multiple vessels were experiencing communication issues, it wasn't a single ship problem. It was systemic. Below her, Lieutenant Commander Bradley was on a secure phone, his voice rising with frustration. "I understand that, sir. But we can't coordinate a response if we don't have clear communication protocols established." "Yes, sir. I'm aware of the time constraints. Sir, I need guidance on." He was waiting for orders instead of executing solutions. Rachel saw the problem crystallizing in real time. Bradley was competent in routine operations, but a crisis was exposing his limitations as a leader. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything, and helps me bring you more inspiring military stories like this one. Torres appeared back in the gallery, breathing hard. "Ma'am, they're saying the whole Pacific communication grid has intermittent failures. Something about solar flare activity and a satellite malfunction hitting at the same time. They're calling it a perfect storm scenario." Rachel was already moving down the stairs. "Who's the senior watch officer?" "That would be Lieutenant Commander Bradley. But he's busy making phone calls instead of managing the crisis." Rachel finished. She reached the main floor and took in the full scope of the problem. Multiple screens showed vessels attempting to coordinate rescue and support operations for the Halsey. Weather data indicated a storm system moving in that would complicate any response. And the communication failures were spreading, not contracting. A Master Chief was trying to establish a priority communication link. But the junior sailors working the systems weren't coordinating their efforts. They were working in parallel instead of in series, each trying to solve the same problem without communicating with each other. Rachel made a decision that would either validate her presence here or get her thrown out of the building. "Master Chief," she called out, her voice cutting through the noise with the kind of command authority that came from years of leading operations in similar chaos. Master Chief David Park, no relation to Lieutenant Park from the MPs, turned toward her. His expression was stressed, bordering on overwhelmed. "Ma'am, if you're not essential personnel, I need you to clear the operations floor." "Master Chief, you have 3 teams trying to establish the same communication link simultaneously. You need to designate a primary and have the others focus on alternative channels." Park stared at her for a moment. Processing. His eyes dropped to her visitor badge, then back to her face. "Who the hell are you?" "Someone who spent the last 8 years coordinating special operations communications in hostile environments," Rachel said, moving closer. "And right now, your set in last operations center is failing because you have leadership paralysis. Lieutenant Commander Bradley is waiting for orders from above instead of executing solutions, and your people don't have clear direction." Park's jaw tightened. He glanced at Bradley, who was still on the phone, still waiting for guidance that clearly wasn't coming fast enough. Then he looked back at Rachel. "You worked with the teams?" he asked quietly. "SEAL Team 7 and 3, plus special mission units I can't name," Rachel confirmed. "I've run communications in worse conditions than this, Master Chief. And right now, you have sailors on that destroyer who are scared and isolated. And the longer this takes, the worse it gets." Park made his decision in 2 seconds. "What do you need?" "First, I need Bradley off that phone and managing his people. Second, I need your junior personnel consolidated under experienced leadership. Third, I need someone to prioritize communication channels based on criticality, not on who's yelling loudest. I can't just tell a lieutenant commander to." "Then I will," Rachel said, already moving toward Bradley's position. She walked up to the officer with the kind of calm confidence that made people pause. Bradley was mid-sentence on his phone call when Rachel simply stood next to him, waiting. Her presence was enough to make him glance over, irritation flashing across his face. "I'm on an important call," Bradley said, covering the phone with his hand. "Sir, with respect, you need to hang up and lead your people," Rachel said quietly. "The coordination you're asking for isn't going to come from above. It needs to come from you." Bradley's face flushed. "I don't know who you think you are, but you can't just walk onto my operations floor. And my name is what?" "Captain Rachel Vance, United States Navy, retired," Rachel said, her voice remaining calm but carrying undeniable authority. "I've been conducting a security and operations audit for Admiral Garrett. And right now, sir, your operations center is failing because you're asking for permission instead of executing your training." The words hung in the air. Several nearby personnel had stopped what they were doing, listening to the exchange. Bradley's hand tightened on the phone. "I don't have authority to make those kinds of decisions without guidance from, sir." "Do you know the Navy's core values?" Rachel interrupted. "Of course I do," Bradley snapped. "Honor, courage, commitment." "Then have the courage to make decisions," Rachel said. "You have experienced personnel who know what needs to be done. Your job right now isn't to wait for orders. It's to enable them to execute their place training." For a long moment, Bradley simply stared at her. The operations center had gone quiet enough that the conversation was audible across most of the floor. Then, slowly, Bradley spoke into his phone. "Sir, I need to go. We have a crisis to manage. I'll provide updates through proper channels." He hung up without waiting for a response. Bradley turned to face his operations floor, his jaw set with new determination. "Master Chief Park, I need a status update on all communication attempts with USS Halsey. Petty Officer Torres, consolidate our satellite communication efforts under one team. Chief Williams, establish alternative communication protocols using every available channel. I want options, not excuses." The operations center erupted back into coordinated activity, but this time with clear direction and purpose. Master Chief Park caught Rachel's eye and gave her a single, sharp nod of respect. Rachel stepped back, letting the professionals work. But she remained on the floor, observing, ready to offer guidance if needed. Because while Bradley had found his courage, the crisis was far from over. And somewhere out in the Pacific, 300 sailors on the USS Halsey were depending on the people in this room to coordinate their rescue. The next 20 minutes were a masterclass in military crisis response. Once properly directed, Torres and his team established a fragmented but functional communication link with the Halsey, using a combination of satellite, high-frequency radio, and even a relay through a passing commercial aircraft that happened to be in range. The destroyer's situation was serious but not catastrophic. A lightning strike during storm operations had fried their primary communication systems and damaged backups. They were taking on some water from rough seas, but damage control teams had it contained. The real danger was that other vessels trying to coordinate support couldn't establish reliable contact. Rachel watched as Bradley coordinated with Third Fleet operations, providing regular updates and managing multiple response efforts simultaneously. He'd transformed from a paralyzed officer waiting for guidance into a decisive leader managing a complex crisis. Master Chief Park worked beside him, directing the technical execution with the kind of calm expertise that came from decades of service. But Rachel noticed something else, a pattern in the communication failures that bothered her. The intermittent outages weren't random. They were too regular, too consistent. Solar flare activity was unpredictable. These failures had a rhythm to them. She approached one of the technical workstations, where a senior contractor, a man in his 50s with the kind of weathered competence that marked someone who'd spent a lifetime in communications systems, was analyzing signal data. "Excuse me," Rachel said. "I'm Captain Vance. Can you show me the pattern of communication failures over the last hour?" The contractor looked at her visitor badge, then at her face. Whatever he saw there convinced him to comply. He pulled up a graphical display showing communication nodes, with red markers indicating failures. Rachel studied it for 30 seconds. Then her blood went cold. "Master Chief," she called out, her voice sharp enough to cut through the operational noise. Park came over immediately. "Ma'am? Look at this pattern," Rachel said, pointing to the display. "These aren't random failures. They're targeted." Park leaned in, his experienced eyes scanning the data. His expression shifted from confusion to concern to alarm. "Jesus. That's not solar flare activity. That's someone actively disrupting specific communication channels," Rachel finished. The Halsey's distress was real. But the communication failures preventing coordination, those are being caused deliberately. Bradley had noticed the urgent consultation and joined them. "What are you talking about?" Rachel pointed to the display. "Sir, solar flares cause broad-spectrum disruption. This is surgical. Someone is jamming specific frequencies at specific times to maximize confusion while making it look like natural interference." "That's insane," Bradley said. "Why would—" He stopped as the implications hit him. "You're saying this is an attack?" "I'm saying someone is using the Halsey's legitimate emergency to create chaos and test our response capabilities," Rachel said. "Or to cover something else. We need to inform higher command," Bradley said, reaching for his phone. "We need to identify what they're covering for first," Rachel countered. "Master Chief, can you pull up all vessel movements in the affected area for the last 6 hours?" Park moved to a workstation and began pulling data. Rachel stood behind him, her mind working through possibilities. If this was a probe, what were they testing? If it was cover for something else, what were they hiding? The display populated with vessel tracks. Dozens of ships, both military and civilian, moving through the busy Pacific shipping lanes. Most were exactly where they were supposed to be, but one track caught Rachel's eye. A civilian cargo vessel, the Pacific Fortune, had altered course 3 hours ago, moving away from standard shipping lanes toward a more isolated area. The course change had occurred right before the communication disruptions began. "That one," Rachel said, pointing. "What do we know about it?" Torres, who had been listening, quickly accessed the vessel registry. Pacific Fortune, registered in Panama, carrying electronics components from Japan to Los Angeles. 40,000 ton. Displacement. Crew of 23. Current position. Torres pulled it up. The vessel was now in an area with minimal traffic, approximately 80 miles from any military assets. Rachel's instincts, honed by years of counterintelligence work, were screaming. Has anyone tried to communicate with that vessel in the last 3 hours? Not that I'm seeing in the logs, Torres said. Why would we? It's just a commercial cargo ship. A commercial cargo ship that changed course right before our communication systems started failing in a pattern consistent with deliberate jamming, Rachel said. She turned to Bradley. Sir, I recommend we attempt contact with that vessel and, if we can't establish communication, send assets to investigate. Bradley hesitated. That's a big escalation based on speculation. It's pattern recognition based on 8 years of counterintelligence operations, Rachel replied. Sir, I could be wrong. But if I'm right and we do nothing, we're missing a significant threat. Master Chief Park spoke up. Sir, Captain Vance's analysis is sound. Even if it turns out to be nothing, the prudent action is to verify. Bradley looked between them. The weight of command pressing visibly on his shoulders. This was beyond a communication crisis now. This was potentially a security threat. And he was the officer who had to make the call. Make the contact attempt, Bradley ordered. And get me Coast Guard coordination. If the Pacific Fortune doesn't respond appropriately, we'll need them to investigate. Torres moved immediately to establish contact with the cargo vessel. Rachel watched the attempt, counting the seconds. Standard maritime radio protocols would get a response within 30 seconds for a properly manned vessel. 30 seconds passed. No response. 60 seconds. Still nothing. 2 minutes. Torres tried alternative frequencies. Complete silence. Sir, Torres said, his voice tight. The Pacific Fortune is not responding on any standard maritime channels. They should be monitoring these frequencies by international law. Bradley's expression hardened. He picked up a secure phone. Get me Coast Guard District 11 operations. This is an urgent maritime security matter. Rachel felt her heart rate slow and sharpen, the familiar sensation of a crisis shifting from chaos to focused action. She'd been right. Something was wrong with that vessel. The question now was what, and how much danger it represented. A petty officer first class approached Bradley. "Sir, I have something else." The Pacific Fortune's AIS transponder went dark approximately 20 minutes ago. Automatic identification system transponders were required for all commercial vessels over a certain size. They broadcast position, heading, and identification constantly. For one to go dark was highly irregular and potentially illegal. "That's it," Bradley said. "This isn't coincidence anymore." He spoke into the phone. "Yes, this is. Lieutenant Commander Bradley. Naval Base San Diego Communications Center. We have a commercial vessel, the Pacific Fortune, that has ceased communication, turned off its AIS transponder, and is operating in an unusual pattern coinciding with communication disruptions affecting military operations. I'm recommending immediate investigation." Rachel could hear the tinny voice on the other end of the phone. Urgent and professional. The Coast Guard would respond quickly. They had cutters and aircraft that could reach the Pacific Fortune's position within an hour. But an hour was a long time if the vessel was doing something it shouldn't be doing. "Master Chief," Rachel said quietly, "do we have any assets closer to that position?" Park checked his displays. "Negative. Nearest vessel with intercept capability is USS Shiloh. But she's dealing with her own communication issues and is at least 90 minutes out." "What about air assets?" "We have helicopters at North Island. But they'd need authorization to investigate a civilian vessel. And with current communication problems, getting that authorization could take—" "I can authorize it," a voice said from behind them. Everyone turned. Admiral Garrett stood at the entrance to the operations floor. Commander Hastings beside him. The Admiral's expression was grim, and he was in working uniform, suggesting he'd come directly from another crisis. "Admiral on deck," someone called, but Garrett waved off the formal attention. "As you were, I've been monitoring the situation from my command center." He walked directly to Bradley. "Lieutenant Commander, brief me." 60 seconds. Bradley delivered a crisp, thorough summary of the crisis. From the Halsey's distress through Rachel's identification of the suspicious communication pattern to the Pacific Fortune's unusual behavior. Garrett listened without interruption, his eyes occasionally flicking to Rachel. When Bradley finished, the Admiral turned to her. "Captain Vance, what's your assessment?" Rachel chose her words carefully. "Sir, I believe someone is conducting a sophisticated probe of our communication and response systems. The Halsey's emergency was legitimate, but the communication failures were deliberately enhanced to test how we respond to coordination challenges. The Pacific Fortune is either the source of the jamming or is doing something they don't want us to notice while we're distracted." Confidence level, 70%. "Sir, I could be seeing patterns that aren't there. But the coincidences are too numerous and too precise." Garrett nodded once. "Good enough." He turned to Bradley. "I'm authorizing helicopter reconnaissance of the Pacific Fortune immediately. Coast Guard is coordinating, but I want eyes on that vessel within 30 minutes. "Yes, sir," Bradley said, already moving to implement the order. Garrett looked at Rachel. "Captain, you're coming with me to the command center. I want your expertise available as this develops." "Sir, I'm just a contractor conducting an audit. You're a naval intelligence officer with 8 years of special operations experience who just potentially identified a security threat that everyone else missed." Garrett interrupted. "Right now, I need that expertise more than I need your audit report. Is that clear?" Rachel came to attention. "Crystal clear, sir." As they walked toward the door, Master Chief Park called out, "Captain Vance." Rachel turned. Park stood at attention and rendered a sharp salute. "Thank you, ma'am." Around the operations floor, other personnel who had been listening who had seen her guide them through the crisis, came to attention and saluted. Rachel returned the salute, her throat tight with unexpected emotion. 15 years since she'd received a salute in uniform. 2 years since she'd retired. But these sailors weren't saluting her clothes or her rank. They were saluting her competence and her commitment to their mission. As she followed Admiral Garrett out of the communications center, Rachel caught a glimpse of Commander Hastings's expression. The arrogance from the morning was completely gone, replaced by something that looked like respect mixed with chagrin. The test had evolved into something much bigger than security protocols. And somewhere out in the Pacific, a mystery vessel was doing something worth hiding. The next hour would determine whether Rachel's instincts had just prevented a major security breach, or if she'd sent the Navy chasing shadows. Either way, she was all in now. Admiral Garrett's command center was a stark contrast to the communications operations floor, where that space had been chaotic with immediate crisis management. This room hummed with strategic coordination. Large displays covered 3 walls, showing vessel positions, communication status, weather patterns, and a dozen other data streams that gave the Admiral and his staff a comprehensive picture of their area of responsibility. Senior officers and enlisted personnel worked at individual stations, their voices professional and measured as they managed various aspects of the ongoing crisis. The USS Halsey situation had stabilized. The destroyer was in no immediate danger, and coordination with support vessels had improved. But the Pacific Fortune mystery was evolving into something potentially more serious. Rachel stood beside a workstation that had been hastily cleared for her use, studying the data about the cargo vessel. Commander Mitchell worked nearby, pulling every available piece of information about the ship, its crew, its cargo, and its ownership structure. The ownership is buried under 3 layers of shell companies, Mitchell reported. Not unusual for commercial shipping, but it makes verification difficult. What about the cargo manifest? Rachel asked. Electronics components, semiconductors, circuit boards, consumer electronics, all properly documented for customs. Mitchell paused. But if someone wanted to hide something in a shipment like that, it would be almost impossible to verify without a physical inspection, Rachel finished. Admiral Garrett stood at the center of the room, hands clasped behind his back, watching the displays. A Coast Guard HC-130 Hercules had been diverted to conduct aerial reconnaissance of the Pacific Fortune. They were 15 minutes out. Commander Hastings approached Rachel, tablet in hand. His demeanor had completely changed from the morning's confrontation. "Ma'am, I pulled the Pacific Fortune's communication history. In the last 72 hours, they've been completely normal regular check-ins with maritime traffic control, weather updates, standard operations. Then 3 hours ago, everything stopped. Right when the Halsey's crisis began," Rachel noted. "Yes, ma'am." Hastings paused. "Captain Vance, I owe you more than an apology for this morning. I let my ego blind me to possibilities I should have considered." Rachel looked at him. "Commander, you did what you thought was right to protect your admiral and your base. You just learned a lesson about assumptions. That's how we grow." "Still," Hastings said quietly, "I had a decorated officer arrested. If I'd taken 60 seconds to make one phone call, then I wouldn't have gotten the full picture of your security response protocols." Rachel interrupted gently. "Which was the entire point. You're a good officer, Commander. You just had a bad day. Learn from it and move on." Hastings straightened slightly, something like gratitude crossing his expression. "Thank you, ma'am." A voice came over the command center's speakers. "Admiral Garrett, this is Coast Guard 147. We have visual contact with the Pacific Fortune." Everyone's attention snapped to the main display. A video feed from the aircraft appeared, showing the cargo vessel from above. It looked normal enough. A standard container ship plowing through moderate seas, but Rachel's trained eye caught details that others might miss. "Zoom in on the forward deck," she said. The camera operator complied. The image tightened, showing the forward section of the vessel in detail. "There," Rachel pointed. "That antenna array. That's not standard commercial equipment. Admiral Garrett stepped closer to the display. "Commander Mitchell, what are we looking at?" Mitchell studied the image, then quickly pulled up technical specifications on his tablet. "That appears to be a phased array system, similar to what military vessels use for." "Oh, hell. For what?" Garrett demanded. "For signals intelligence and electronic warfare," Rachel said quietly. "That vessel isn't just carrying cargo. It's a spy ship." The command center went silent, except for the ambient hum of equipment. "Coast Guard 147, Garrett said, his voice calm but carrying unmistakable authority. "Do not approach closer. Maintain surveillance from current distance and altitude." "Copy that, Admiral." Maintaining position, Garrett turned to his staff. "Get me 3rd Fleet Intelligence. Immediately. And I want FBI, Counterintelligence, and Naval Criminal Investigative Service on secure channels within 5 minutes." The command center erupted into controlled activity. Rachel watched the display, her mind racing through implications. A foreign signals intelligence vessel operating in U.S. waters, deliberately jamming military communications during a crisis, was an act of espionage at minimum, and potentially an act of war depending on attribution and intent. "Captain Vance," Garrett said, "I need your assessment." "What are they doing?" Rachel studied the video feed, noting the vessel's position relative to known U.S. military assets. "Sir, they're collecting electronic intelligence. Every time we establish a port's communication link, change frequencies, or coordinate a response, they're recording our procedures, our encryption methods, our response times." The Halsey's crisis gave them a perfect opportunity to see how we handle a real emergency. "The jamming? To stress test our backup systems and alternative communication methods. They want to know what we do when primary systems fail." Rachel turned to face the Admiral. "Sir, this is a sophisticated operation. Whoever is running that vessel has detailed knowledge of our communication infrastructure and our response protocols." A captain from the intelligence section spoke up. "Admiral, 3rd Fleet confirms they've been tracking increased foreign intelligence activity in the region for the past 2 months. Nothing concrete enough to act on. But this fits the pattern." "What nation?" Garrett asked. "Most likely Chinese, sir. Based on methodology and regional interests." Rachel nodded. "The antenna array is consistent with Chinese signals intelligence equipment. And the timing is significant. We have major exercises planned for next month. They're collecting baseline data now, so they can identify any changes in our procedures during the exercises." Admiral Garrett's jaw set in a hard line. "Well, they just made a critical mistake. They assumed we wouldn't notice their pattern in the middle of a crisis." He turned to Rachel. "Thanks to you, Captain." "Sir, you identified a threat that my entire intelligence apparatus missed." Garrett interrupted. "You saw a pattern in communication failures that everyone else dismissed as natural interference. And you had the courage to speak up even though you're technically here as a civilian contractor conducting an audit." Around the command center, personnel were listening even as they worked. Rachel could feel the shift in how they looked at her. This morning she'd been a woman arrested at the gate. Now she was the person who'd potentially stopped a major intelligence breach. Master Chief Park from the communications center had been summoned to the command center and now stood near Rachel's workstation. He'd clearly heard the exchange between her and the Admiral. "Captain Vance," Park said quietly, "when you said you worked with SEAL teams, you weren't exaggerating." "No, Master Chief, I wasn't." "And the tattoo Jackson recognized, that's SEAL team insignia?" Rachel hesitated, then pulled up her left sleeve slightly. The intricate tattoo was partially visible, the Navy anchor and eagle, but also other symbols that those familiar with naval special warfare would recognize. Unit designations from SEAL Teams 3 and 7. A small trident marking intelligence support. And woven through it all, coordinates that marked specific operations she'd been part of. Park stared at the ink for a long moment. "How many deployments?" 8, Rachel said. 4 with Team 7. 3 with Team 3. And one with a unit I still can't talk about. Jesus, Park breathed. And you've been walking around my base in civilian clothes, letting people treat you like exactly what I appeared to be, Rachel finished. Which was the point, Master Chief. How your personnel react to someone who doesn't fit their expectations is exactly what this audit was designed to measure. A lieutenant commander from the operations section approached. Captain Vance, Admiral Garrett would like your input on the response options for the Pacific Fortune. Rachel followed him to a tactical display where Garrett and several senior officers were discussing how to handle the spy vessel. Captain Michael Foster, whom Rachel had encountered earlier, was among them. Captain Vance, Foster said, nodding respectfully. I apologize for not intervening this morning when Commander Hastings had you detained. I recognized you from the training briefing but didn't want to overstep. No apology necessary, Captain. You were respecting chain of command. Still, Foster said, I should have trusted my instincts. Admiral Garrett cut in. Gentlemen, we can discuss this morning's lessons later. Right now, I need options for the Pacific Fortune. Captain Vance, you have the most relevant experience here. What do we do? Rachel studied the tactical display. The spy vessel was in international waters, which complicated the legal situation. They couldn't simply board it or force it to port without creating a major diplomatic incident. Sir, we have several options, but they all have consequences, Rachel began. First option. We let them know we've identified them. We establish communication, make our awareness clear, and essentially tell them to leave. That ends their collection immediately, but shows them exactly what tipped us off, which helps them refine their operations for next time. Second option, Garrett asked. We continue surveillance without letting them know we're aware. We monitor what they're collecting, potentially feed them false information, and gather our own intelligence on their methods. But that's risky if they're collecting data on our procedures. We're teaching them how to defeat our systems. Third option, Rachel's expression hardened. We treat this as the hostile act it is. We position assets to interdict the vessel, make clear that we consider their actions a threat, and force them to withdraw under pressure. That sends a strong message but escalates the situation significantly. Admiral Garrett considered each option, his face reflecting the weight of command. This wasn't just a tactical decision, it was a strategic one that could affect international relations. Captain Foster, Garrett said. What's your read? Foster studied the display. Sir, if this were purely a naval matter, I'd recommend option 3. But the diplomatic ramifications are beyond our purview. This needs to go up the chain. Agreed, Garrett said. He turned to Commander Hastings. Get me Compax FLT on secure comms. This decision is above my pay grade. He looked at Rachel. But Captain Vance's analysis will be part of my recommendation. As Hastings moved to establish the communication link with Commander Pacific Fleet, a petty officer approached Rachel. Ma'am, I'm Petty Officer Jackson. We met briefly in Afghanistan. Operation Cyclone, 2019. You were the intelligence liaison for our team's mission in Helmand Province. Rachel studied his face, memory clicking into place. Jackson, you were the communications specialist. Your call sign was static. Jackson's face broke into a genuine smile. Yes, ma'am. I can't believe you remember. You set up a relay network through 3 separate valleys using equipment held together with zip ties and determination, Rachel said. Hard to forget that kind of creative problem solving. Ma'am, when I saw you this morning at Pin Gate 7, I knew I recognized you, but I couldn't place it. Then when I heard you'd been arrested. He shook his head. I should have said something. You didn't know enough to connect the dots, Rachel said. And even if you had, what would you have done? Told the Marines that you thought the woman they were detaining might be a former intelligence officer you'd worked with years ago. I guess that would have sounded pretty crazy, Jackson admitted. Besides, Rachel said, the whole point was to see if your security procedures worked even when people's assumptions were wrong. You did your job correctly. A chief petty officer who'd been listening approached. Captain Vance, If you don't mind my asking, why didn't you just show proper credentials this morning? Why go through all the hassle of being arrested? Rachel smiled slightly. Chief, if I'd shown up with proper credentials and full identification, everyone would have treated me exactly as they're supposed to treat a visiting officer. Professional, respectful, by the book, but that doesn't test the real vulnerabilities. Which are? The chief asked. Human assumptions, Rachel replied. The assumption that someone in civilian clothes must be civilian. The assumption that a woman showing up at your gate must be less important than a man in uniform. The assumption that if someone were really significant, they'd make sure you knew it. Master Chief Park had joined the growing group around Rachel. You're saying we're trained to respond to rank and uniform, not to actual threats. I'm saying your training is excellent, but it has blind spots, Rachel said. And those blind spots are exactly what adversaries exploit. That spy ship out there. She gestured to the display showing the Pacific. Fortune. They're exploiting the blind spot of assuming all cargo vessels are just cargo vessels. They're hiding in plain sight, counting on us to make assumptions based on appearance. Just like you did this morning, Foster said, understanding dawning. Exactly, Rachel confirmed. The 10 of the 1 methodologies are the same whether it's espionage or security testing. Hide in plain sight. Look like something harmless. And count on people's assumptions to provide cover. Admiral Garrett had been listening while waiting for his secure communication link. Captain Vance, when this crisis is resolved, I want you to brief my entire staff on exactly this topic. Not just the audit findings, but the broader lesson about assumptions and security vulnerabilities. Sir, I'm not sure Commander Hastings will appreciate. Commander Hastings will appreciate anything that makes him a better officer, Garrett said firmly. And so will everyone else. This morning's incident and today's crisis have exposed systemic issues that go beyond individual mistakes. The secure communication link, established with an electronic tone. Admiral, I have Compact FLT standing by, Hastings reported. Garrett moved to the secure communication station. This is Garrett. Sir, we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. As the Admiral briefed his superior, Rachel found herself surrounded by personnel who wanted to hear more about her time with the SEAL teams, her intelligence, work, and her assessment of current security postures. The questions came fast, professional, genuinely curious. She answered what she could, deflected what was still classified, and watched as the crew of this command center began to understand that the woman arrested at Gate 7 that morning wasn't just some contractor or auditor. She was a combat veteran with a service record that most of them would never match. She was an intelligence officer who had operated in some of the most dangerous environments in the world, and she was someone who had quietly, professionally identified a major security threat, while everyone else was focused on more obvious problems. The recognition was spreading beyond this room now. Word was moving through the base with the speed that only military gossip could achieve. The woman in civilian clothes. The one who'd been arrested. The one with the SEAL team tattoo and the sharp eyes and the calm competence that came from real experience. By the time Admiral Garrett finished his call with Pacific Fleet Command, Rachel could see the shift in how everyone in the command center looked at her. Not with suspicion or curiosity anymore, but with professional respect. The test had evolved into something much bigger than anyone had planned, and it was far from over. The decision came down from Pacific Fleet within 30 minutes. Monitor and document, but do not interdict. The USS Shiloh, which had resolved its communication issues, would shadow the Pacific Fortune at a distance while other assets positioned themselves to respond if the situation escalated. The Coast Guard aircraft would maintain aerial surveillance. Most importantly, Navy intelligence was now fully engaged, coordinating with multiple agencies to identify everyone involved with the suspicious vessel and trace its operational network. But none of that stopped Admiral Garrett from wanting answers about exactly who had been walking around his base in civilian clothes. Captain Vance, Garrett said, gesturing toward a small conference room adjacent to the Command Center. A word, please. Rachel followed him into the quieter space. Commander Hastings and Captain Foster joined them, along with Master Chief Park. The door closed, muffling the ambient noise from the operations floor. Garrett sat at the head of the small conference table. Before we go any further, I need to understand exactly who you are and what your actual role is here. The version Commander Mitchell briefed me with yesterday was clearly incomplete. Rachel took a breath. This was the moment she'd been both expecting and dreading. The moment when her carefully constructed audit cover fell away and the full truth had to come out. Sir, my name is Captain Rachel Vance, United States Navy, retired as of 18 months ago. My official role here is as a civilian contractor conducting security and operations audits for OPNAV N2N6. Naval Intelligence, Foster said. Yes, sir. I spent my entire career in intelligence, with specialization in counterintelligence and special operations support. My last active duty assignment was as Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations for Naval Special Warfare Command. The weight of that position settled over the room. Naval Special Warfare Command oversaw all SEAL teams and special boat units. The Deputy Director of Intelligence Operations was responsible for coordinating intelligence support for some of the most sensitive operations the Navy conducted. 8 years with the teams, Master Chief Park said, quietly. That's what you told me. But you weren't just attached to them. You were running their intelligence operations. For 3 years. Yes, Rachel confirmed. Before that, I was deployed with SEAL Teams 3 and 7 as an intelligence officer, providing tactical intelligence support in theater. Admiral Garrett leaned back, processing this information. So, when you showed up at Gate 7 this morning in civilian clothes with questionable credentials, I was testing exactly what we discovered, that your security protocols focus on verification of paperwork rather than recognition of emits, potential threats, or anomalies. Rachel said. Sir, the audit was real. But it was also much more comprehensive than Commander Mitchell's briefing suggested. How comprehensive? Garrett asked. Rachel pulled a tablet from her bag and unlocked it. Sir, I've been on your base for 3 weeks. The room went silent. 3 weeks? Hastings said, his voice strained. But you only arrived this morning. No, Commander. I only revealed myself this morning. I've been here since October 14th, operating in various roles. Contractor, maintenance worker, visiting dependent, delivery driver. I've accessed 32 separate facilities, attended 4 classified briefings, and identified 17 separate security vulnerabilities, ranging from procedural gaps to potential insider threats. Foster stared at her. The briefing 3 months ago where I saw your photo. That wasn't theoretical training. That was preparation for your actual operations. Yes, sir. Selected personnel in specific positions were briefed so they could recognize me if necessary, but with instructions not to interfere unless I was in actual danger. And Commander Hastings wasn't one of those selected personnel. Garrett said, understanding dawning. No, sir. His reaction was part of the test. How would your Chief of Staff respond to an ambiguous situation? Would he verify before acting? Would he apply appropriate skepticism? Would he coordinate with others who might have information he lacked? Hastings's face had gone pale. The entire arrest, that was all planned? Not planned. Exactly, Rachel said. I created conditions that would reveal how your security and command structure would respond. The fact that it resulted in my arrest showed me exactly where the vulnerabilities are. Master Chief Park spoke up. Ma'am, with respect, that seems like a hell of a risk. What if things had escalated? What if someone had gotten hurt? Master Chief, I've been detained in much more dangerous circumstances than a Navy base MP station, Rachel said quietly. I've been held at gunpoint by Taliban fighters who thought I was a spy. I've been interrogated by foreign intelligence services who suspected my cover. A few hours in an American military detention facility was never a real risk. The room fell quiet as the implications of that statement sank in. This wasn't someone playing at security audits. This was a combat-experienced intelligence officer who had operated in genuinely hostile environments. "Show them," Garrett said. Nodding toward Rachel's arm, Rachel hesitated, then pulled up her left sleeve fully, revealing the complete tattoo. The room's occupants leaned in to study it. The Navy anchor and eagle were immediately recognizable, but the additional details told a deeper story. SEAL Team insignia. Coordinates marking specific operations. A small trident. The SEAL warfare device, with support inscribed beneath it. Unit patches from Teams 3 and 7. And, woven through everything, Arabic script. "What does the Arabic say?" Foster asked. "Those who watch over warriors carry their own scars," Rachel translated. "It's from a poem by an Afghan interpreter I worked with. He was killed protecting our team during a mission in Kandahar." Park's expression shifted to deep respect. "You got ink for an interpreter?" "He saved my life and the lives of 6 SEALs," Rachel said simply. "He deserved to be remembered." Garrett stood and walked to the window overlooking the command center. "Captain Vance, I need to know something. The Pacific Fortune situation. Was that part of your audit?" "No, sir. That was real-time threat identification using my actual training and experience. But it's also exactly the kind of thing your audit was supposed to reveal," Garrett said, turning back to face her. "Whether my personnel would recognize and respond appropriately to a sophisticated threat." "Yes, sir. And we didn't." "You did." Rachel chose her words carefully. "Sir, your personnel responded excellently once the crisis was identified and leadership stepped up. Lieutenant Commander Bradley found his courage when challenged. Master Chief, Park coordinated technical execution flawlessly. Your communications team worked efficiently once they had clear direction, but they needed you to identify the pattern in the first place," Hastings said quietly. "Commander, pattern recognition comes from experience," Rachel said. "I've spent 15 years studying how adversaries operate, how they think, what methodologies they use. Your team has spent their time learning how to operate and maintain systems. Both skill sets are valuable. The question is whether they're being integrated effectively." Foster leaned forward. "So what's your assessment? Are they being integrated effectively here?" Rachel met his gaze. "Captain Foster, you recognized me from a training briefing but didn't speak up when Commander Hastings was having me arrested. Why?" "So?" Foster's jaw tightened. I didn't want to overstep. Hastings outranks me in this chain of command. I thought maybe there was something about the situation I didn't understand." "Exactly," Rachel said. "You had relevant information but didn't share it because of concerns about hierarchy and potential embarrassment. That's the vulnerability I'm here to identify. Not a lack of skill or training, but a command climate where people are afraid to speak up when they see something wrong." The room absorbed that assessment in uncomfortable silence. "We have a culture problem," Garrett said flatly. "You have a common military problem," Rachel corrected. "Respect for rank and chain of command are essential, but they can create blind spots when junior personnel hesitate to question senior decisions, or when senior personnel are more focused on protecting their authority than seeking truth." "How do we fix it?" Hastings asked. "You start by acknowledging it," Rachel said. "You use today as a teaching moment. You show your entire command that even senior officers can make mistakes, that questioning assumptions is encouraged, and that the mission matters more than individual egos." Garrett nodded slowly. "That briefing I mentioned earlier, the one where I want you to address my staff. I want it tomorrow morning. Everyone from division officers up. And I want you in uniform." Rachel blinked. "Sir, I'm retired. I don't have." "Your retirement orders specify that you retain your rank and can be recalled to active duty for specific assignments," Garrett interrupted. "Consider this one of those assignments. When you brief my staff tomorrow, I want them to see Captain Rachel Vance, United States Navy, not a civilian contractor. I want them to understand exactly what kind of officer I had arrested this morning." "Sir, I'm not sure it's not a request, Captain," Garrett said, his tone making clear that despite her retired status, He was pulling rank. My staff needs to see that the woman they dismissed as a contractor is actually a highly decorated officer with more combat experience than most of them. They need that visual reality. Check. Rachel straightened. Yes, sir. A knock at the door interrupted them. A lieutenant poked his head in. Admiral. We're getting updates from the Shiloh. The Pacific Fortune has altered course and is heading west, away from U.S. waters. Intelligence assessment is that they know we're onto them and are withdrawing. Smart move on their part, Rachel said. They collected what they could, and now they're leaving before we can escalate. Will they be back? Foster asked. Different ship, different methodology. But yes, Rachel confirmed. This kind of intelligence collection is ongoing. We detect one operation. They shift to another approach. It's a constant cycle. Garrett looked at the lieutenant. Pass to Shiloh. Continue shadowing until the Pacific Fortune is well clear of our operational areas. And coordinate with intelligence. I want every bit of data we collected about this vessel analyzed and shared with the appropriate agencies. Yes, sir. As the lieutenant left, Garrett turned back to Rachel. Captain, I'm formally requesting that your audit be expanded. I don't just want a report on security vulnerabilities, I want you to help us redesign our entire approach to base security and threat recognition. Sir, that's beyond the scope of my current contract. Then we'll write a new contract, Garrett said firmly. What happened today convinced me that we're not seeing the threats we need to see. I need someone with your experience to help us fix that. Rachel considered the request. Expanding her role would mean more time on this base, more exposure, more risk that her methodologies would become known and less effective in future audits. But it would also mean actually fixing the problems she'd identified rather than just documenting them. Sir, I'll need to clear it with my chain of command at OPNAV N2, N6. I'll make the call myself, Garrett said. This is too important to leave to normal channels. Master Chief Park spoke up. Admiral, if I may, Captain Vance's presence here is becoming well known. By tomorrow, everyone on base will know about the arrest, the Pacific Fortune incident, and her actual background. That's going to make it hard for her to operate undercover for any expanded operations. Good point, Garrett acknowledged. He looked at Rachel. How do you want to handle that? Rachel thought for a moment. Sir, there's value in being known. If your personnel understand that someone with my background is evaluating their operations, they'll be more conscious of their actions. Sometimes the best security comes not from catching people doing wrong, but from encouraging them to do right. Deterrence rather than detection, Foster said. Exactly. Garrett made his decision. All right. Tomorrow's briefing will serve multiple purposes. It will educate my staff about the lessons from today. It will demonstrate what right looks like in terms of questioning assumptions and recognizing threats. And it will put everyone on notice that security and operational excellence are not optional on this base. He stood, signaling the end of the meeting. Captain Vance, you've given me a lot to think about today. And you've probably prevented a significant intelligence breach. That deserves recognition. Sir, I was just doing my job. No, Garrett said firmly. You were doing everyone's job, including mine. You saw what we missed. You acted when others hesitated, and you maintained your professionalism even while being unjustly detained. He extended his hand. Thank you. Rachel shook his hand, recognizing the sincerity in his gesture. As they filed out of the conference room and back into the command center, Rachel could feel eyes on her. The personnel who had been working steadily through the crisis now looked at her with undisguised curiosity and respect. Petty Officer Jackson approached. Ma'am, some of us were wondering if you're willing to talk about it. What was it like working with the teams? Before Rachel could answer, Master Chief Park interceded. Jackson, give the captain some space. She's been dealing with crises all day. It's all right, Master Chief, Rachel said. She looked at Jackson and the small group that had gathered. Working with SEAL teams was the honor of my career. They're the most professional, dedicated warriors I've ever known. And they taught me that real strength isn't about being the loudest or the most aggressive. It's about being the most prepared and the most committed to your teammates. Is it true you were on Operation Cyclone? Another petty officer asked. We heard rumors about a major intel operation in Helmand that prevented a major attack. Rachel smiled slightly. I can neither confirm nor deny anything about Operation Cyclone because it's still classified. But I can tell you that intelligence work in combat zones is about making sure the operators have every advantage possible. It's about seeing threats before they materialize and protecting the people who go into harm's way. The respect in their eyes was unmistakable now. This wasn't just a contractor who'd gotten lucky identifying a threat. This was a combat veteran who had earned her place among warriors. As the day shifted into evening and the crisis fully stabilized, Rachel found herself thinking about tomorrow's briefing. About standing in front of senior officers in uniform for the first time in 18 months. About explaining not just what had happened today, but why it mattered and what it revealed about how the Navy thought about security. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to her contact at OPNAV N2N6, need to talk about expanding San Diego assignment. Admiral Garrett wants broader scope. The response came back within minutes. Garrett already called. You're authorized. Make it count. Rachel smiled. Of course Garrett had already made the call. That's what good leaders did. They identified what needed to be done and made it happen. Tomorrow would be interesting. But tonight, she had a report to write and a briefing to prepare. The woman who'd been arrested at Gate 7 12 hours ago was about to show this entire base what a real naval officer looked like. And some of them were going to be very uncomfortable with that revelation. Rachel stood in the small bachelor officer quarters room that had been hastily assigned to her, staring at the uniform hanging on the back of the door. Service dress blues, the same uniform she'd worn at her retirement ceremony 18 months ago, carefully preserved in a garment bag that had traveled with her through a dozen different audits and assignments. She hadn't expected to wear it again so soon. The jacket still fit perfectly, the 4 gold stripes on each sleeve marking her rank as captain. The ribbons on her chest told a story that few people would fully understand. 3 combat action ribbons, 2 Navy Commendation Medals with Combat V, a Joint Service Achievement Medal, a Navy Achievement Medal, and several campaign and service ribbons that marked deployments to places she couldn't always talk about. But it was the devices above the ribbons that would draw the most attention. The Naval Intelligence insignia. And above that, in the place of highest honor, the Navy Cross. Rachel's hand trembled slightly as she touched the distinctive blue ribbon with white edges. She'd received it for actions during a classified operation in Afghanistan, when a SEAL team had been ambushed and she'd coordinated a rescue under fire while wounded herself. The citation had been heavily redacted, and most people who saw the award would never know the full story. 3 SEALs had lived because she'd refused to abandon her post. 2 others had died before help could arrive. She wore the medal not with pride, but with the weight of those who hadn't made it home. A knock at the door pulled her from the memory. Come in, she called. Master Chief Park entered, carrying a tablet and looking uncharacteristically nervous. Ma'am, Admiral Garrett asked me to check if you needed anything before the briefing. It starts in 45 minutes. I'm fine, Master Chief. Just getting reacquainted with my uniform. Park's eyes went to the Navy Cross, and his expression shifted to something close to awe. Ma'am, I didn't realize. The briefing yesterday mentioned your service record, but it didn't specify that you'd received the Navy Cross. It's not something I advertise, Rachel said quietly. The actions that earned it cost good people their lives. It's not an award you display with pride, it's a reminder of said sacrifice. Park was quiet for a moment. Ma'am, if I may ask, what happened yesterday after you left the command center? The whole base has been talking about the Pacific Fortune incident and your role in identifying the threat. What are they saying? Everything from, she's a CIA operative, to, she's some kind of special forces operator. Park said with a slight smile. The rumor mill is working overtime, but Captain Foster put out a statement that you're a retired naval intelligence officer conducting security audits. That seemed to calm things down somewhat. Somewhat. Well, there's still a lot of curiosity about why a retired '06 with a Navy Cross would be walking around in civilian clothes, getting arrested at gates. Rachel smiled. That's exactly the question Admiral Garrett wants to address in this morning's briefing. Speaking of which, Park said, the conference room is filling up fast. Every department head, division officer, and senior enlisted leader on the base has been ordered to attend. That's over 200 people. Rachel felt a flutter of nerves. She'd briefed larger groups before, but always as an active duty officer with the full weight of her position behind her. This was different. These people had seen her arrested, detained, and dismissed as inconsequential. Now she had to stand before them in uniform and explain why all of that had been necessary. Any word on Commander Hastings? Rachel asked. He's been in meetings with Admiral Garrett since 0600, Park said. Rumor is he offered his resignation. Did the Admiral accept it? No, ma'am. Word is that Garrett told him that officers who learn from their mistakes are more valuable than officers who never make them in the first place. Rachel nodded with approval. Garrett's a good leader. Yes, ma'am. And he wants everyone to know that what happened to you was a teaching moment, not a witch hunt. Park hesitated. Ma'am, there's something else. Petty Officer Jackson has been telling everyone about working with you in Afghanistan, about Operation Cyclone, and how you coordinated intelligence for SEAL operations. Some of the younger sailors are, well, they're pretty excited to hear you speak. Excited or curious? Both. Park admitted. You're kind of a mystery, ma'am. A decorated combat officer who retired young and now works as a possible contractor doing security audits. It's not a typical career path. No. Rachel agreed. It's not. She finished adjusting her uniform, checked her appearance in the mirror one final time, and picked up her briefing materials. Let's not keep them waiting, Master Chief. The walk from the BOQ to the main conference center took 10 minutes. As they crossed the base, Rachel noticed the reactions from personnel. They passed. Sailors and Marines would glance at her, do a double-take when they saw her rank and ribbons, and often slow their pace to get a better look. She heard whispered conversations. Is that her? Look at those ribbons. She's got more combat decorations than the Admiral. I heard she single-handedly identified a Chinese spy ship. She's got a Navy Cross. Do you know how rare those are? Rachel kept her expression neutral, her bearing professional. But, internally, she understood what was happening. These people were recalibrating their understanding of who she was and what she represented. Yesterday, she'd been a civilian contractor. Today, she was a highly decorated naval officer with a service record that commanded respect. The transformation wasn't about the uniform. It was about forcing people to confront their assumptions. They arrived at the conference center, a large auditorium-style space normally used for all-hands meetings and command briefings. Master Chief Park had been right, it was packed. Every seat was filled. And more, personnel stood along the walls. The room buzzed with conversation that died down the moment Rachel entered. She walked down the center aisle toward the stage, conscious of hundreds of eyes tracking her movement. Some faces she recognized from yesterday. Lieutenant Commander Bradley, looking nervous but determined. Captain Foster, watching with professional interest. The MPs who had detained her, Lieutenant Park and Petty Officer Chen, both sitting ramrod straight with expressions that mixed discomfort with curiosity. And in the front row, Commander Hastings sat beside Admiral Garrett. Hastings's face was carefully composed, but Rachel could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands gripped the armrests of his chair. Admiral Garrett stood as Rachel reached the stage. Ladies and gentlemen, attention on deck. The entire room rose as one, coming to attention with a precision that spoke to their training and discipline. Please be seated, Garrett said. We have important matters to discuss this morning, and I want everyone's full attention. The rustle of 200 people sitting filled the space, then silence settled over the room. Garrett moved to the frieze podium. Yesterday, This command experienced two significant events that I want to address directly. First, a civilian contractor was detained at Gate 7 for what appeared to be a security violation. Second, during a major communications crisis, that same contractor identified a foreign intelligence threat that our entire command structure had missed. He paused, letting that statement sink in. What many of you don't know is that both events were connected, and both revealed critical vulnerabilities in how this base thinks about security and threat recognition. Garrett gestured toward Rachel. Captain Rachel Vance, United States Navy, retired, is not a typical contractor. She's a combat veteran with 24 years of service, most of it in naval intelligence and special operations support. She's received the Navy Cross for Valor Under Fire. And she's been conducting one of the most comprehensive security audits ever authorized by naval intelligence. The room's attention was absolute now. Every eye was on Rachel. Captain Vance has been on this base for 3 weeks, Garrett continued. In that time, she's accessed 32 separate facilities, attended classified briefings, and operated in multiple roles: contractor, maintenance worker, delivery driver, and yesterday, a questionable visitor at our front gate. She did all of this to test whether our security procedures and command structure could identify and respond appropriately to sophisticated threats. A murmur rippled through the audience. 3 weeks. She'd been here for 3 weeks, and no one had noticed anything unusual until yesterday. What happened at Gate 7 yesterday morning was not a mistake, Garrett said, his voice firm. It was a deliberate test of our goer systems. And while I'm pleased that our gate personnel followed proper procedures, the incident revealed serious gaps in how we think about security and how we respond to ambiguous situations. He turned to face Rachel. Captain Vance, if you would. Rachel stood and moved to the podium. For a moment, she simply looked out at the assembled personnel, seeing their curiosity, their uncertainty, and in some faces, their discomfort. Good morning, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the space. I'm going to tell you a story about assumptions and how they can kill you. The bluntness of that opening statement rippled through the room. 2 years ago, I was supporting a SEAL team operation in eastern Afghanistan. Rachel continued. We had intelligence that a high-value target was meeting with Taliban commanders in a small village. The plan was solid, the intelligence was good, and the team was experienced. Everything pointed to a successful operation. She clicked a button on the podium, and an image appeared on the screen behind her, a satellite view of a village compound. What we didn't account for was a single assumption. We assumed that because we had local intelligence sources confirming the meeting, those sources were reliable. We assumed that because the village had been cooperative in the past, it would remain cooperative. We assumed that our pattern of operations hadn't been detected and adapted to. Another click. The image shifted to show a tactical map with routes marked. All 3 assumptions were wrong. Our intelligence sources had been compromised. The village had been intimidated into cooperation with the Taliban. And our operational patterns had been studied and exploited. The team walked into an ambush that killed 2 SEALs and wounded 4 others. The room was silent, the weight of those deaths settling over everyone. I survived that ambush because one of those SEALs, Petty Officer First Class Michael Torres, threw himself between me and an RPG blast, Rachel said, her voice steady but carrying emotion. I received the Navy Cross for coordinating the team's extraction while wounded. But I don't wear this medal with pride. I wear it as a reminder that assumptions kill, and that intelligence officers have a responsibility to question everything, especially their own conclusions. She paused, letting that sink in. Yesterday morning, many of you made assumptions about me. You assumed that because I was wearing civilian clothes, I must be a civilian. You assumed that because I looked ordinary, I must be unimportant. You assumed that because I was a woman arriving alone without fanfare, I couldn't possibly be someone significant. Rachel's gaze swept across the room. Those assumptions weren't malicious. They were natural human reactions based on pattern recognition and social conditioning. But in a security environment, they're exploitable vulnerabilities. Another click. The screen showed the Pacific Fortune. Yesterday afternoon, while this command was managing a legitimate crisis with the USS Halsey, I noticed something unusual. Communication failures that appeared to be caused by solar activity had a pattern that was too regular, too specific. A commercial cargo vessel had altered course in a way that coincided with those failures. And when we attempted contact, that vessel went silent. She looked at Lieutenant Commander Bradley. Lieutenant Commander Bradley was managing that crisis. He was overwhelmed, uncertain, and waiting for guidance from higher command. But when challenged to take action, he found his courage and led his team brilliantly. The question I want you all to consider is, why did it take a challenge from a civilian contractor for him to step up? Bradley's face flushed, but he didn't look away. The answer, Rachel continued, is the same as why I was arrested at Gate 7. We've created a culture where people are more afraid of being wrong than they are committed to being right, where junior personnel hesitate to speak up because they might offend senior officers, where senior officers defend their authority instead of questioning their assumptions. She clicked again. Images appeared showing various personnel from yesterday's events: the Marines at Gate 7, Commander Hastings at the MP station, Captain Foster in the hallway, Master Chief Park in the operations center. Every person in these images performed their duties professionally. The Marines checked credentials. Commander Hastings protected his admiral's time. Captain Foster respected chain of command. Master Chief Park coordinated technical operations, and Lieutenant Commander Bradley eventually led his team through a crisis. None of them failed at their jobs. Rachel's voice sharpened. What failed was the system that didn't encourage them to question, to verify, to communicate across hierarchical boundaries. What failed was a command climate that valued authority over accuracy. Admiral Garrett leaned forward slightly, his expression intent. This was harder hitting than he'd probably expected, but he didn't interrupt. So, how do we fix it? Rachel asked. How do we create a security culture that can recognize sophisticated threats while maintaining proper military discipline and chain of command? She advanced to the next slide, which showed a simple framework. 1. Question assumptions. 2. Verify independently. 3. Communicate across boundaries. 4. Prioritize mission over ego. First, we teach ourselves to recognize when we're making assumptions, Rachel explained. When someone doesn't fit the expected pattern, that's not a reason to dismiss them, it's a reason to look closer. When something seems slightly off, that's not paranoia. It's pattern recognition that deserves investigation. She looked directly at Commander Hastings. Commander Hastings assumed I was attempting unauthorized access because I didn't fit his mental model of what a legitimate visitor would look like. That assumption was reasonable given his information. What wasn't reasonable was his refusal to make one phone call that would have verified my story. His ego became more important than accuracy. Hastings's jaw tightened, but he nodded slightly, acknowledging the truth. Second, we verify independently, Rachel continued. Captain Foster recognized me from a training briefing, but didn't speak up because he thought Commander Hastings must know something he didn't. That's deference to rank overriding better judgment. When you have information that might be relevant, you have an obligation to share it, regardless of rank or potential embarrassment. Foster's expression was thoughtful, accepting the critique. Third, we communicate across boundaries. Lieutenant Commander Bradley was waiting for guidance from higher command, while Master Chief Park was trying to manage technical operations without clear direction. Neither communicated effectively with the other, and it took an outsider to bridge that gap. We need to break down the barriers that prevent information from flowing freely. And fourth, Rachel said, her voice softening slightly, we prioritize mission over ego. Every person in this room is a professional. You've trained for years to do your jobs excellently. But sometimes excellence requires admitting you don't know something, asking for help, or accepting guidance from unexpected sources. That's Not weakness, that's wisdom. She advanced to the final slide, which showed a quote attributed to Admiral Arleigh Burke. Leadership consists of picking good men and helping them do their best for you. Admiral Burke understood something fundamental, Rachel said. Good leadership isn't about having all the answers. It's about creating an environment where the best answers can emerge from anyone, regardless of rank or position. She closed her briefing materials and looked out at the assembly. Yesterday, I was arrested, detained, and dismissed as insignificant by multiple people on this base. That was exactly what I wanted to happen, because it revealed the vulnerabilities we need to address, but it also revealed something positive when given proper leadership and direction. Every person involved performed admirably. Rachel's voice strengthened. You have good people here, you have strong procedures. What you need is a command climate that encourages people to question, to verify, and to communicate without fear. Admiral Garrett has committed to creating that climate. The question is whether you'll embrace it or resist it. She stepped back from the podium. Questions? The room was silent for several long seconds. Then a hand rose in the back, a young ensign, barely out of the academy, with the nervous energy of someone about to speak truth to power. Ma'am, the ensign said, you mentioned that assumptions kill, but we're taught to follow orders and respect rank. How do we balance questioning assumptions with maintaining military discipline? It was exactly the right question. Excellent question, Ensign, Rachel said. The balance isn't about questioning orders. It's about questioning your understanding of the situation before orders are given. If you see something that doesn't match the pattern, you bring it up. You say, Sir, I notice X, and it seems unusual. Should we verify? That's not insubordination. That's professional situational awareness. Another hand rose, this time from a senior chief. Ma'am, you said you've been on base for 3 weeks. How many times did someone actually question your presence or verify your credentials beyond initial checkpoints? Rachel smiled slightly. Twice. A Marine sergeant at the armory questioned why a contractor needed access to weapons storage areas and made me wait while he verified my clearances. And Master Chief Rodriguez, who escorted me to Admiral Garrett's office yesterday, asked questions that showed she was evaluating whether I was actually who I claimed to be. Both of them did exactly what they should have done. What happened to them? The chief asked. I'm recommending both for commendations, Rachel replied. They saw something unusual and responded appropriately. That's the behavior we want to encourage. More hands rose. The questions came faster now. More confident. How do we recognize the difference between healthy skepticism and paranoia? What specific procedures should change based on your findings? Are there other auditors operating on base right now? Rachel answered each question thoroughly, using specific examples from her 3 weeks of observation. She praised personnel who had performed well, critiqued systems that had failed, and provided concrete recommendations for improvement. 45 minutes into the Q&A, Admiral Garrett stood. Captain Vance, thank you. That was exactly the conversation we needed to have. He turned to face the assembly. Before we conclude, I want to address Commander Hastings' role in yesterday's events. The room's attention shifted to Hastings, who stood slowly, his face carefully composed. Commander Hastings offered his resignation yesterday, Garrett said. I refuse to accept it. He made a mistake, but it was a mistake that revealed systemic issues, not personal failure. More importantly, he's shown the courage to acknowledge that mistake and learn from it. Garrett looked at Hastings. Commander, do you have anything you'd like to say? Hastings moved to the podium, standing beside Rachel. For a moment, he seemed to struggle with what to say. Then he turned to face her directly. Captain Vance, yesterday I had you arrested because my ego wouldn't let me consider that I might be wrong. I dismissed you as unimportant because you didn't fit my expectations. I failed to make simple verifications that would have resolved the situation immediately. And in doing so, I failed my admiral, my command, and my own standards as an officer. His voice was steady, but the emotion behind it was clear. I cannot apologize enough for the disrespect you were shown. But more than that, I want to thank you, because your presence here, your willingness to let yourself be humiliated for the purpose of revealing our vulnerabilities, has taught me a lesson I will never forget." Hastings came to attention and raised his hand in a salute. "Ma'am, it is an honor to serve with you." The salute hung in the air, a formal gesture of respect that carried weight, far beyond protocol. Rachel returned it crisply, her eyes meeting Hastings's with understanding and acknowledgement. And then, something extraordinary happened. Lieutenant Commander Bradley stood from his seat and saluted. Then Captain Foster. Then Master Chief Park. Then Lieutenant Park, and Petty Officer Chen from the MPs. Like a wave spreading across the auditorium, personnel rose to their feet and saluted. Senior chiefs with decades of service. Young ensigns, fresh from the academy, Marines and sailors, officers and enlisted. Every person in that room standing and rendering the military courtesy reserved for superior officers and extraordinary occasions. 200 people saluting in perfect silence. The only sound the rustle of fabric and the scrape of boots on the floor. Rachel felt her throat tighten. She'd received salutes countless times during her career, but never like this. This wasn't protocol. This wasn't formality. This was recognition and respect earned through sacrifice and competence, offered freely by people who understood what it meant. She held the salute, her bearing perfect, her eyes moving across the room to acknowledge each person. And as she did, she saw tears on some faces, pride on others, understanding, and respect, and something that looked like gratitude. These people weren't just saluting her rank or her decorations. They were saluting the lesson she'd taught them, the vulnerabilities she'd exposed, and the trust she'd placed in them by revealing her true self. After 30 seconds that felt like a lifetime, Admiral Garrett's voice cut through the silence. Order. The salutes dropped with perfect precision, and the room sat as one. Garrett's voice carried emotion that he didn't try to hide. What you've just witnessed is what right looks like. Captain Vance earned your respect not by demanding it, but by demonstrating competence, courage, and commitment to this command's mission. That is the standard we will all strive to meet. He looked at Rachel. Captain, is there anything else? Rachel took a breath, steadying herself. Just one thing, sir. Thank you all for your service. Thank you for your willingness to learn. And thank you for the honor of serving among you again, even if only temporarily. She stepped away from the podium as Admiral Garrett moved to conclude the briefing. But before she could leave the stage, Petty Officer Jackson stood from his seat in the middle of the auditorium. "Ma'am," Jackson called out, his voice carrying across the space. "Permission to speak?" Rachel nodded. "Go ahead." Petty Officer. "Ma'am, I worked with you in Afghanistan on Operation Cyclone. You coordinated intelligence for my SEAL team during some of the most dangerous missions we ever ran. And I just want everyone here to know." He paused, emotion clear in his voice. "You saved my life. Multiple times. You're the reason 12 of us made it home when we should have been killed. And it is an absolute honor to see you here today." The room erupted in spontaneous applause. It started with Jackson's section, then spread across the entire auditorium, building to a sustained ovation that echoed off the walls. Rachel stood on the stage, surrounded by the noise and emotion, and for the first time in 18 months, she felt like she was home. Not in a place, but among her people. Among warriors and professionals who understood sacrifice and service and the unbreakable bonds that connected everyone who wore the uniform. When the applause finally faded, Admiral Garrett dismissed the Senate assembly. But, as personnel filed out, many approached the stage, waiting for a chance to speak with Rachel personally. A young lieutenant introduced herself as someone who was considering a career in intelligence and asked for advice. A senior chief who'd served in Iraq thanked her for highlighting the importance of questioning assumptions. 3 junior sailors, who'd worked in the communications center yesterday, wanted to shake her hand and express their gratitude for her guidance during the crisis. Commander Hastings waited until most of the crowd had cleared, then approached Rachel one final time. "Captain," he said quietly. "I meant what I said. Thank you for the lesson. I've been in the Navy for 23 years, and I've never had my assumptions challenged quite so thoroughly." "Commander, you're a good officer who had a bad day," Rachel replied. "Use yesterday to become a better officer. That's all any of us can do." Hastings nodded, shook her hand, and walked away with straighter shoulders than he'd had when he arrived. Master Chief Park was the last to approach. "Ma'am, that was one hell of a briefing. I think you changed some minds today." "I hope so, Master Chief. But the real question is whether those changed minds will translate into changed behaviors." "They will," Park said with confidence. "People heard you. They saw you. And more importantly, they respect you. That's how culture changes one leader at a time, setting the example." As Rachel finally left the auditorium, the morning sun was high in the sky, burning away the last of the coastal fog. She'd come to this base 3 weeks ago as a ghost, operating in shadows and testing vulnerabilities. Now she walked in daylight, wearing her uniform and her rank and the recognition of people who understood what she represented. The audit wasn't over. There would be more work to do, more systems to evaluate, more recommendations to write. But something fundamental had shifted. Naval Station San Diego would never look at security the same way again. And Rachel Vance had reminded to herself why she'd spent 24 years serving her country. Not for the recognition or the awards, but for the privilege of working alongside people who were committed to excellence and willing to learn from their mistakes. The salute moment would be remembered on this base for years to come. But what mattered more was what came after it, the hard work of turning lessons into action. And that work was just beginning. 3 days after the briefing, Commander Derek Hastings sat in his office reviewing the security protocol revisions that Captain Vance had recommended. His desk was covered with documents, each one highlighting a vulnerability she'd identified and proposing solutions that ranged from simple procedural changes to comprehensive cultural shifts. It was humbling work, reading through 3 weeks of observations that documented every mistake, every assumption, every blind spot that had existed right under his nose. A knock at the door interrupted his reading. "Come in," he called. Captain Foster entered, carrying a tablet and wearing an expression that Hastings had come to recognize. Over the past few days, the look of someone who'd been forced to confront uncomfortable truths. "Derek," Foster said, using his first name in the privacy of the office. "We need to talk about the implementation timeline for Vance's recommendations." Hastings gestured to a chair. "Admiral Garrett wants everything implemented within 90 days. That's ambitious, given the scope of changes." "It's more than ambitious," Foster said, sitting down. "Some of these recommendations require complete restructuring of how we think about access control and threat assessment. That's not something we can accomplish in 3 months. Then we need to prioritize," Hastings replied. "What are the highest risk vulnerabilities that need immediate attention?" Foster pulled up a document on his tablet. "According to Vance's analysis, our top 3 vulnerabilities are: first, over-reliance on credentialing systems without human judgment. Second, inadequate communication between security personnel and operations staff. And third, a command climate that discourages junior personnel from questioning senior decisions." Hastings winced at that last one. "That third vulnerability. That's on me." "It's on all of us," Foster corrected. "I saw Vance's face from that training briefing and said nothing." Master Chief Park noticed something unusual about her behavior in the communications center, but didn't flag it until the crisis forced his hand. Lieutenant Commander Bradley waited for orders from above instead of executing his training. "We all contributed to the problem, which makes us all responsible for fixing it," Hastings said. He stood and walked to his window, looking out over the base. "Mike, can I ask you something honestly?" "Of course. Do you think I should have resigned?" Foster was quiet for a moment, considering the question carefully. "No," he said finally. "I think you should have done exactly what you did. Acknowledged the mistake, learned from it, and committed to doing better. That's what leadership looks like." "It doesn't feel like leadership," Hastings admitted. "It feels like failure." "Derek, you friend," had a highly decorated intelligence officer arrested because she didn't fit your mental model of what an important visitor should look like. That was a failure. But what you did afterwards, standing in front of 200 people and owning that mistake publicly, that took more courage than most officers ever demonstrate. Hastings turned back to face Foster. The Admiral could have ended my career. He had every right to, but he didn't. Because he understood what Vance was trying to teach us. Good officers make mistakes. Great officers learn from them. Foster leaned forward. You know what the junior officers are saying about you now? I can imagine. They're saying that if a commander can publicly acknowledge a mistake and commit to learning from it, then they can too. You've become an example of what right looks like when things go wrong. Hastings absorbed that. The weight of it settling into his understanding of what had happened. That's not how I expected this to play out. I doubt any of us expected any of this to play out the way it did, Foster said. But here's what I've learned over the past 3 days. Captain Vance didn't come here to destroy careers or did 9 to 2, embarrass people. She came here to expose vulnerabilities so they could be fixed. And she did it in the most effective way possible, by forcing us to see ourselves clearly. Another knock at the door. Master Chief Park entered without waiting for acknowledgement, his face urgent. Sirs, we have a BIS situation at Gate 5. A civilian in a rental car is attempting to access the base with DoD contractor credentials that are flagging as questionable. The gate personnel are asking for guidance. Hastings and Foster exchanged glances. This was the first real test of whether they'd learned anything from Captain Vance's audit. What makes the credentials questionable? Hastings asked. They're valid in the system, but the visitor isn't on any appointment lists, and the company they claim to work for doesn't show up in our approved contractor database. How are the gate personnel handling it? Foster asked. They've politely asked the visitor to wait while they verify, Park replied. They've contacted the company listed on the credentials and are attempting to reach someone in the office that supposedly requested the visit. Hastings nodded slowly. So they're following proper procedure and verifying independently before making a decision. Yes, sir. But they're asking whether they should escalate or simply deny access. This was the moment. The old Hastings would have simply ordered denial of access, protecting his admiral's time and the base's security without considering alternatives. But that approach had led to Captain Vance being arrested. Master Chief, what's your gut telling you? Hastings asked. Park seemed surprised by the question. Sir, you've been doing this for 26 years. You've seen thousands of legitimate visitors and dozens of come-in potential threats. What does your experience tell you about this situation? Park considered for a moment. Sir, it could go either way. The credentials are technically valid, which suggests someone with legitimate access created them. But the lack of appointment and the obscure company name are red flags. If I had to guess, I'd say it's either a legitimate contractor who's poorly coordinated their visit, or someone probing our response procedures. Like Captain Vance did, Foster said. Exactly like Captain Vance did, sir. Hastings made his decision. Here's what we're going to do. Keep the visitor at the gate politely but firmly. Continue verification procedures. And send someone from my office to interview the visitor directly. Someone with enough rank to ask hard questions but not so senior that they'll intimidate a legitimate contractor. Who do you have in mind? Park asked. You, Master Chief. You've got the experience to read people, and you won't let ego get in the way of finding the truth. Park straightened. Yes, sir. What are my rules of engagement? Ask questions. Verify answers. Trust your instincts. And if something feels wrong, don't be afraid to say so, regardless of what the credentials say or what explanations you're given. Understood, sir. As Park left to handle the situation, Foster smiled slightly. You just applied every lesson Vance taught us. I'm trying, Hastings said. Though I still half expect her to appear in civilian clothes and tell me I failed another test. Actually, a voice said from the doorway, you passed. Both officers turned to see Captain Vance standing in the corridor, wearing civilian clothes and carrying a tablet. She'd apparently been listening to the entire exchange. Hastings felt his pulse quicken. "Captain, I didn't realize you were—" "The visitor at Gate 5 is one of my colleagues," Rachel said, stepping into the office. "Another contractor conducting spot checks on implementation of my recommendations. I wanted to see if the lessons from last week had taken hold." "You're still testing us," Foster said, though there was no accusation in his tone. "Only recognition. Always," Rachel confirmed. "That's how we ensure changes stick. We don't just make recommendations and walk away. We verify that the recommendations are actually being followed." "And?" Hastings asked, tension clear in his voice. "How did we do?" Rachel's expression softened. "You did exactly what you should have done. You gathered information. You consulted with experienced personnel. You empowered Master Chief Park to use his judgment, and you prioritized verification over expedience." She paused. "That's what growth looks like, Commander." Hastings felt something loosen in his chest, a tension he'd been carrying since the moment he'd ordered Captain Vance arrested. "Thank you, ma'am." "Don't thank me yet," Rachel said with a slight smile. "We're going to keep testing, keep probing, keep pushing, until these new procedures become second nature. Culture change doesn't happen because of one briefing or one incident. It happens through repetition and reinforcement." She moved to Hastings's desk and looked at the documents spread across it. "You've been reviewing my recommendations." "Every word," Hastings confirmed. "Some of them are difficult to read." "Good," Rachel said. "They should be. I documented every vulnerability, every failure, every moment where assumptions overrode judgment. That's uncomfortable reading, but it's necessary if we're going to fix the problems." Foster spoke up. "Captain, can I ask you something? The morning you showed up at Gate 7, you could have revealed your identity at any point. You could have shown proper credentials, mentioned your service record, even just name-dropped Admiral Garrett. Why didn't you?" Rachel was quiet for a moment, considering her answer. "Because showing credentials would have only tested whether your systems work when people play by the rules. But threats don't play by the rules. Foreign intelligence operatives don't show up with honest credentials and respectful attitudes. They lie. They manipulate. They exploit assumptions and blind spots." She looked between the two officers. "I needed to see what would happen when someone appeared to be one thing but was actually something else. Because that's the exact methodology that adversaries use. And the only way to defend against it is to train yourselves to look past surface appearances and verify the truth, even if it means being arrested and humiliated," Hastings said quietly. "Even then," Rachel confirmed. "Because my temporary humiliation is worth it if it prevents a real security breach that could cost lives." A message came through on Foster's tablet. He read it, then looked up. "Master Chief Park just reported from Gate 5. He interviewed your colleague, verified their credentials through multiple channels, and determined they were legitimate despite the administrative confusion. He's approved their access and assigned an escort." "Perfect," Rachel said. "That's exactly the right balance: healthy skepticism combined with thorough verification, leading to an informed decision." "Will there be more tests?" Hastings asked. "Count on it," Rachel replied. "For the next 60 days. My team will be conducting random spot checks and probes. You won't know when or where they're coming. The goal is to make proper verification procedures so routine that they become instinctive." Foster nodded slowly. "Constant pressure until good habits form." "Exactly." Hastings stood, coming to attention. "Captain Vance, I want to say something that I should have said days ago. Not as the officer who made a mistake, but as someone who recognizes excellence when he sees it." He raised his hand in a crisp salute. "Thank you for your service to this command. Thank you for the lessons you've taught us. And thank you for having the courage to let yourself be humiliated for the purpose of making us better." The salute held weight beyond protocol recognition, respect, and genuine gratitude. Rachel returned it with equal precision. "Commander, you're going to be fine. You're already becoming the officer this command needs you to be." As she prepared to leave, Hastings stopped her. "Captain, one more question. The Navy Cross you wear. The citation is classified, but there are rumors about what happened. Is it true that you coordinated a rescue under fire while wounded?" Rachel's expression shifted, becoming more guarded. "Yes. And is it true that 2 SEALs died during that operation?" "Yes." "Then how do you wear that medal?" Hastings asked quietly. "How do you accept recognition for actions that cost other people their lives?" It was a deeply personal question. The kind that might be considered inappropriate under other circumstances. But Hastings asked it with genuine curiosity, not judgment. Rachel was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice carried the weight of hard-won wisdom. "I wear it because those men died doing what they believed in. They died protecting their teammates and completing their mission. And the greatest disrespect I could show them would be to hide from the recognition of their sacrifice." She paused. "I don't wear this medal with pride, Commander. I wear it with responsibility, the responsibility to honor their memory by ensuring that other people don't die because of preventable mistakes. Like the mistakes we were making before you arrived," Foster said. "Like those?" "Yes." Hastings nodded slowly, understanding settling into his expression. "That's what this whole audit has been about, hasn't it? Not catching people doing wrong, but preventing future tragedies by fixing present vulnerabilities. That's what it's always been about," Rachel confirmed. She left the office, her footsteps fading down the corridor. Hastings and Foster remained, both sitting with the weight of what they'd learned, not just about security, procedures, or command climate, but about leadership and sacrifice and the costs of service. "She's remarkable," Foster said finally. "She is," Hastings agreed. "And she just gave us a gift. The gift of seeing ourselves clearly and having the chance to do better. What do we do with it?" Hastings looked at the recommendations spread across his desk. "We do the work. We implement every change. We train every person. And we make sure that the next time someone like Captain Vance walks through our gates, we see them for who they really are, not who we assume them to be. Even if it takes, quote, 90 days. Even if it takes 90 years, Hastings said with quiet determination. "Because this isn't about meeting a deadline. It's about honoring the lesson she taught us." Foster stood to leave, then paused. "Derek, you know what the most remarkable thing about all of this is?" "What?" "She's not even on active duty anymore. She could have walked away from all of this. But she didn't. She keeps serving because that's who she is." Hastings nodded. "Once a naval officer, always a naval officer. The uniform doesn't make you what you are. Your commitment does. That's worth remembering," Foster said. As Foster left, Hastings returned to his desk and the stack of recommendations waiting for implementation. But before he dove back into the work, he did something he hadn't done in years. He pulled out a notebook and wrote down a quote he'd heard once, attributed to an Admiral whose name he couldn't remember. "The greatest leaders are those who teach others to be better than themselves." Captain Rachel Vance had done exactly that. She'd shown them their flaws, their blind spots, their assumptions, and then she'd given them the tools to fix them. Commander Derek Hastings was determined not to waste that gift. 60 days after Captain Rachel Vance first walked through Gate 7 in civilian clothes, Naval Station San Diego had transformed in ways both visible and subtle. The physical changes were the easiest to document. New verification procedures at all gates, with personnel trained to look beyond credentials to behavioral indicators. Enhanced communication protocols between security and operations staff. Regular cross-training sessions where junior personnel were explicitly encouraged to question procedures and identify potential vulnerabilities. But the deeper changes, the ones that mattered most, couldn't be measured in procedures or protocols. They lived in the way people thought about security, in how they questioned their own assumptions, and in the culture of continuous improvement that had taken root throughout the command. Rachel sat in Admiral Garrett's conference room, reviewing the final audit report before its submission to OPNAVN 2 and 6. Commander Mitchell and Master Chief Park sat with her, along with Captain Foster, and, notably, Commander Hastings. The metrics are impressive, Garrett said, studying the data on his May tablet. Security incident response times down by 32%. Verification procedures completed more thoroughly, but actually faster than before. And most significantly, we've had 17 instances where personnel identified and properly handled ambiguous situations that might have been missed under the old protocols. 17 tests? Foster asked Rachel. 17 real-world situations, Rachel corrected. My team conducted 12 additional spot checks, but 5 were legitimate, ambiguous situations: contractors with unusual credentials, maintenance workers in unexpected fouled areas, that kind of thing. In every case, your personnel handled them correctly. Define correctly, Hastings said. They questioned what seemed unusual. They verified independently. They communicated across organizational boundaries. And they made informed decisions rather than assumptions. Rachel smiled slightly. Everything we talked about in that briefing has become operational practice. Master Chief Park pulled up a specific incident on his tablet. Ma'am, there was one situation 3 weeks ago that I wanted to ask you about. A woman in civilian clothes showed up claiming to be a Defense Intelligence Agency inspector. She had credentials that looked legitimate, but weren't in our system. Gate personnel detained her politely, verified her identity through multiple channels, and eventually cleared her for access. I remember that one, Rachel said. What's your question? Was that one of your tests? Rachel's expression was carefully neutral. What do you think, Master Chief? Park studied her face for a moment, then smiled. I think that was an actual DIA inspector who happened to show up during our audit period, and whose visit became an unintentional test of whether our new procedures worked in real-world conditions. And they worked perfectly. We verified without insulting, questioned without accusing, and ultimately made the right call. Park paused. Though I also think you were watching the whole thing to see how we'd handle it. I neither confirm nor deny, Rachel said with a slight smile. But hypothetically, if I had been watching, I would have been impressed with how professionally the situation was handled. Garrett cleared his throat, drawing attention back to the broader discussion. Captain Vance, your final recommendations go beyond procedural changes. You're suggesting a fundamental restructuring of how we think about security training and command climate. Yes, sir. Because the vulnerabilities we identified weren't primarily technical. They were cultural. You can have perfect procedures, but if people are afraid to use them or don't understand why they matter, they'll find ways to work around them. Give me an example, Garrett said. Rachel pulled up a section of her report. Week 2 of my initial observation. I walked into a classified briefing room carrying a box labeled office supplies. 3 people saw me enter. None of them challenged my presence because they assumed that someone in the back must have verified my access. That's what we call distributed responsibility. Everyone assumes someone else has done the verification, so no one actually does it. How did you fix that? Foster asked. We implemented a simple rule. Everyone is responsible for security, not just security personnel. If you see someone in a space and you don't know why they're there, you verify. It doesn't matter if you're the most junior person in the room, security is everyone's responsibility. Mitchell nodded. We've been reinforcing that in every briefing and training session. It's becoming second nature. Which is exactly the goal, Rachel said. Security isn't something you do. It's something you are. It's a mindset that becomes integrated into every action and decision. Hastings spoke up. Captain, I've been tracking something that I wanted to run by you. Since your briefing 60 days ago, we've seen a 38% increase in junior personnel raising concerns or questions to senior officers. Some of them have been valid security issues. Some have been operational questions. Some have just been confusion about procedures. But the fact that junior people feel comfortable speaking up, that seems significant. It's very significant, Rachel confirmed. That's the cultural shift we were aiming for. When junior personnel feel empowered to raise concerns without fear of reprisal, you create a self-correcting system where problems get identified and fixed early. Not all senior officers have been happy about it, Foster noted. Some feel like their authority is being questioned. Their authority is being questioned, Rachel said bluntly. But authority that can't withstand questions probably isn't legitimate authority in the first place. Real leadership welcomes scrutiny because it makes everyone sharper and more effective. Garrett smiled slightly. You've certainly made my command sharper, Captain. Sometimes uncomfortably so. Discomfort is often where growth happens, sir. A knock at the door interrupted them. A young lieutenant entered, looking nervous. Sir, I'm sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation that requires your immediate attention. Garrett's expression sharpened instantly. What kind of situation? Sir, there's a vessel, approximately 40 miles off the coast, that's exhibiting unusual behavior. Not a cargo ship this time, it's a civilian yacht. But it's been moving in patterns that don't match recreational boating. And it's been in the same general area for the past 18 hours. Rachel felt her pulse quicken. This was either a real situation or an extraordinarily sophisticated test of whether the command had learned to identify threats early. Either way, it would reveal how deeply the lessons had taken root. What makes it unusual? Foster asked. The lieutenant pulled up a display on the conference room screen. Sir, the yacht's movement pattern suggests it's conducting some kind of survey or observation. It's staying just outside territorial waters but maintaining a position that gives it line of sight to our communications arrays and the departure patterns of surface vessels. Who identified this as unusual? Garrett asked. Petty Officer Second Class Martinez, sir. She's been monitoring commercial traffic as part of her regular duties and noticed the pattern. She brought it to her chief's attention, who verified her observations and escalated to me. Rachel glanced at Master Chief Park, who nodded slightly. Martinez was one of the junior sailors who had been in the communications center during the Pacific Fortune incident. What's our current response? Garrett asked. Coast Guard has been notified and is moving assets to investigate. We're also coordinating with Naval Intelligence to pull information about the yacht's registration and ownership. Good, Garrett said. Continue coordination and keep me updated every 30 minutes. He looked at the lieutenant. And make sure Petty Officer Martinez knows that her vigilance is noted and appreciated. Yes, sir. As the lieutenant left, Garrett turned to Rachel. Well, what, sir? Is this one of your tests? Rachel smiled. Sir, I honestly don't know. My team isn't running any exercises right now. So this is either a real situation or an unrelated test from another agency. Either way, the response has been exactly what it should be: early identification, proper escalation, and coordinated action. No panic, Foster noted. No assumptions. Just professional threat assessment. Exactly, Rachel said. That's what 60 days of training and cultural reinforcement looks like. Your people now have the instincts to spot anomalies and the confidence to report them. Over the next 2 hours, as they continued reviewing Rachel's final report, updates came in about the suspicious yacht. Coast Guard investigation revealed it was indeed conducting unauthorized observation of naval facilities. The vessel was registered to a shell company with ties to foreign intelligence services. It was escorted out of the area, and the information was forwarded to appropriate counterintelligence agencies for follow-up. 2 intelligence vessels in 2 months, Hastings said quietly. That's not a coincidence. No, it's not. Rachel agreed. Foreign intelligence services are constantly probing for weaknesses in our security. The difference is that now, you're catching them early, instead of missing them entirely. Garrett leaned back in his chair, processing everything. Captain Vance, we're going to ask you a question. And I want an honest answer. Do you think we're actually more secure now? Or do we just think we're more secure because we're catching more threats? It was an insightful question, the kind that showed Garrett understood the deeper implications of what they'd been doing. Both, Rachel said. You're genuinely more secure because your procedures have improved and your personnel are more vigilant, but you're also more aware of threats you were missing before, which might make you feel less secure. That's actually a good thing. Security complacency is more dangerous than security awareness. even when that awareness includes recognizing your vulnerabilities. So we're better, but we know how much we still have to improve, Foster summarized. Exactly. Garrett stood and walked to his window, looking out over the base. Hundreds of personnel going about their duties, ships in port, aircraft overhead. It looked the same as it had 3 months ago. But underneath, everything had changed. Captain Vance, he said without turning around. I'm going to recommend that OPNAV extend your contract and expand your scope. I want you to develop a spatial training program based on what we've learned here. Something that can be implemented across the fleet. Rachel felt a mix of emotions: pride that her work was valued, but also concern about the implications. Sir, that's a significant expansion. It would take me away from operational audits. I know, Garrett said, turning to face her. But consider the impact. Right now, you can audit one base at a time, identify vulnerabilities, make recommendations. That's valuable. But if you develop training that reaches thousands of personnel across dozens of installations, the impact multiplies exponentially. He's right, Mitchell said. What you've accomplished here in 2 months would take most consultants 2 years, and most of them wouldn't have the credibility or experience to drive the kind of cultural change you've achieved. Rachel considered it. Creating a fleet-wide training program would be different from the operational work she'd been doing. It would mean more time in conference rooms and less time in the field, but it would also mean reaching more people, preventing more breaches, and potentially saving lives. I'll need to think about it, she said finally. Fair enough, Garrett replied. But think quickly. OPNAV wants your final report by the end of the week, and they'll want your recommendation on next steps. The meeting concluded with agreements on final report formatting, recommendations for continued monitoring, and transition plans for sustaining the security improvements after Rachel's departure. As everyone filed out, Master Chief Park held back, waiting until the room was empty, except for him and Rachel. Ma'am, can I ask you something personal? Of course, Master Chief. Why do you do this? You've got a Navy Cross, a distinguished service record, and you could probably write your own ticket to any number of high-paying defense contractor positions. So why spend your time letting yourself get arrested and insulted so that people like us can learn to be better? Rachel was quiet for a moment, considering how to answer. Honestly, Master Chief, do you remember what I said in the briefing about Petty Officer Torres, the SEAL who died protecting me? Yes, ma'am. I survived that day because someone believed I was worth saving. He threw himself between me and an explosion because he believed that intelligence officers like me could save lives by preventing ambushes, identifying threats, and keeping operators safe. She met Park's eyes. If I'd spent my time in comfortable contractor jobs after retirement, his sacrifice would have been wasted. But if I use what I learned from people like him to prevent future tragedies, then his death meant something. Park nodded slowly. You're still serving. I'll always be serving, Rachel said simply. The uniform was just the visible part. The commitment is what matters. That's why they saluted you, Park said. Not because of your rank or your awards, because they recognized that commitment. Maybe, Rachel allowed, or maybe they just appreciated finally understanding why they got arrested and embarrassed. Park laughed. Ma'am, with all due respect, we both know it was more than that. As Rachel gathered her materials and prepared to leave, she took one last look around the conference room where so much had happened. Planning sessions, crisis coordination, difficult conversations about vulnerability and growth. This room had been the center of Naval Station San Diego's transformation. But the real transformation had happened in hundreds of smaller moments across the base. In gate personnel taking an extra minute to verify credentials. In junior sailors raising concerns to senior officers. In commanders admitting they didn't have all the answers. Culture change didn't happen in conference rooms. It happened in daily choices, repeated until they became habits, reinforced until they became instincts. 3 weeks later, Rachel stood once again at Gate 7 of Naval Station San Diego. But this time was different. She wore her service dress blues, her rank clearly visible, her credentials properly presented. She wasn't here to test or audit. She was here to say goodbye. The same Marine corporal who had processed her questionable credentials 3 months ago stood at the checkpoint. Morrison's eyes widened in recognition. Then he came to attention and saluted. "Captain Vance, ma'am." "Welcome back." Rachel returned the salute. "Thank you, Corporal." "How have things been?" "Busy, ma'am. We've had a lot more verification procedures to follow since your audit. But," he paused, "it feels like we're doing things right now. More thorough. More professional." "That's good to hear, ma'am, if I may ask. That morning when I processed your ID, and it flagged for verification, you knew what was going to happen, didn't you?" "I had a pretty good idea," Rachel admitted. "And you let it happen anyway. You let Commander Hastings have you arrested. Let the MPs detain you. All so that we could learn." Morrison shook his head. "That takes guts, ma'am. It takes commitment to the mission, Corporal. Which is something you demonstrated then, and continue to demonstrate now. Admiral Garrett speaks highly of the professionalism at this gate." Morrison straightened with visible pride. "Thank you, ma'am. That means a lot." Rachel drove through the gate for the last time, heading toward the building where her final out-processing meeting with Admiral Garrett was scheduled. The base looked different to her now. Not physically, but in the way she understood it. She knew the people, the patterns, the improvements, and the work still left to do. Admiral Garrett's office was quieter than it had been during the height of the crisis. Commander Hastings greeted her professionally, with none of the defensive arrogance he displayed 3 months ago. "Captain Vance, the Admiral is expecting you. But before you go in, I wanted to give you something." He handed her a wooden box, carefully crafted and polished. Rachel opened it to find a plaque. The inscription read, "Captain Rachel Vance, USN, RT. In recognition of extraordinary service, Naval Station San Diego. She taught us to question our assumptions and trust our instincts." Below the text were signatures from dozens of personnel: the Marines from Gate 7, the Communications Center team, Master Chief Park, Captain Foster, Lieutenant Commander Bradley, and many others. "Commander, this is..." Rachel found her voice catching slightly. "This is beautiful. It's from all of us," Hastings said. "Everyone you worked with, everyone you challenged, everyone you made better. We wanted you to know that your work here mattered." Rachel studied the signatures, recognizing names and remembering faces. "Thank you. This means more than you know." Garrett emerged from his office. "Captain Vance, come in." The Admiral's office felt different now too. Less like a place where she was being evaluated, and more like a space where colleagues discussed important work. "Your final report was delivered to OPNV yesterday," Garrett said. "I received a call from the Deputy Chief of Naval Operations this morning. She was extremely impressed." "I appreciate that, sir. She also approved my recommendation for expanding your contract. You'll be developing the fleet-wide security training program we discussed." Garrett paused. "Unless you've decided to decline?" Rachel had spent 3 weeks thinking about that question, weighing the impact of continued audits against the broader reach of training development, considering what would honor the sacrifices of people like Petty Officer Torres, while making the biggest difference to the Navy's security posture. "I'll do it," she said. "But with 2 conditions." "Name them." "First, the training needs to include real-world scenarios, not just theoretical discussions. People learn by doing, not just by listening." "Agreed." "Second condition? I want to conduct quarterly operational audits across the fleet. Even while developing the training program, I need to stay connected to what's actually happening in the field, not just what we think is happening from headquarters." Garrett considered this. "That's a heavy workload." "I'm aware, sir. But it's necessary if we want the training to be relevant and effective." "Done," Garrett said. "I'll make sure the contract reflects both responsibilities." He stood and extended his hand. "Captain, it's been an honor having you here. You've changed this command for the better." Rachel shook his hand. "Sir, you made the changes. I just pointed out where they were needed." "You did more than that," Garrett said firmly. You showed us what right looks like, even when it was uncomfortable. That's leadership. As Rachel prepared to leave, Garrett added one more thing. Captain, there's someone waiting outside who wanted to see you before you left. Rachel walked into the outer office to find Petty Officer Jackson standing at attention. Ma'am, he said formally, I wanted to thank you for everything you did here. And I wanted you to know that, because of what I learned from working with you both in Afghanistan and here, I've been selected for officer candidate school. I'm going to become an intelligence officer. Rachel felt a surge of pride. Jackson, that's outstanding. You'll make an excellent officer. I hope to be half as good as you, ma'am. Don't aim to be like me, Rachel said. Aim to be better. Take what you've learned, add your own insights and experiences, and push the profession forward. That's how we honor the people who taught us. Jackson nodded, understanding the deeper meaning. Yes, ma'am. I will. As Rachel walked out of the administration building for the last time, she noticed a formation of personnel assembled on the parade ground. She hadn't been informed of any ceremony, but as she approached her car, she realized what was happening. Master Chief Park stood at the front of the formation, which included personnel from every department she'd worked with. Communications specialists, gate security, MPs, administrative staff, even the DIA inspector, who had unknowingly become part of their training 3 weeks ago. Park called the formation to attention as Rachel approached. Captain Vance, Park said formally. This command requests permission to render honors. Rachel felt her throat tighten. This wasn't required. This wasn't protocol. This was a choice these people were making. Permission granted, Master Chief. Park brought his hand up in salute, and the entire formation followed, dozens of people holding the salute, not because they had to, but because they wanted to, because they understood what she represented and what she'd given them. Rachel returned the salute, holding it for several long seconds, making eye contact with as many people as she could. Seeing the respect, the gratitude, and the commitment in their faces. When the salute finally ended, Park spoke again. 3 months ago, a woman in civilian clothes walked through Gate 7 and taught this command a lesson we'll never forget. She showed us that appearances deceive, that assumptions kill, and that real security comes from vigilance, verification, and the courage to question everything. He paused, his voice carrying across the formation. She let herself be arrested, detained, and dismissed so that we could learn. She exposed our vulnerabilities so they could be fixed, and she challenged us to be better than we thought we could be. Park looked directly at Rachel. Ma'am, you made us better. Not just as security personnel or intelligence professionals, but as sailors and Marines. You reminded us why we serve and what service actually means. For that, this entire command thanks you. The formation broke into spontaneous applause, the sound echoing across the parade ground. Rachel stood there, surrounded by people she'd challenged and pushed and sometimes frustrated. All of them now showing genuine appreciation for the work she'd done. Commander Hastings stepped forward from the formation. Captain, on behalf of every person you made uncomfortable over the past 3 months. He smiled slightly. Thank you for caring enough to make us uncomfortable. It's made all the difference. As Rachel drove off Naval Station San Diego for the last time, she looked in her rearview mirror at the formation dispersing. At the base, she'd spent 3 months learning and improving. At the people who had grown so much in such a short time, her phone buzzed with a message from OPNAV N2 and 6. Norfolk Naval Station requesting your audit next. When can you start? Rachel smiled. There was always another base, another test, another opportunity to make a difference. She typed back. Give me 2 weeks to prepare. And tell them I'll need access to their gate procedures. The response came quickly. They'll be expecting a civilian contractor. Should we warn them? Rachel's smile widened. Where's the fun in that? As she merged onto the highway, heading toward her next assignment, Rachel thought about Petty Officer Torres and the other warriors she'd served with, about the sacrifices they'd made and the responsibility she carried to honor those sacrifices. She wasn't done serving. She'd never be done serving, because once you understood what service really meant, the commitment, the sacrifice, the responsibility to make things better for those who came after you, you couldn't stop. The uniform was just clothing, the rank was just a title, the commitment was forever. And, somewhere ahead, another base was operating with vulnerabilities they didn't know they had. Another gate was processing visitors based on assumptions instead of verification. Another command structure was waiting to learn lessons it didn't know it needed. Rachel Vance would find those vulnerabilities. She'd expose those assumptions. She'd teach those lessons. And she'd do it all over again, for as long as she could. Because that's what warriors did. They served. 6 months later, Admiral Patricia Vance, no relation to Rachel, sat in the Pentagon, reviewing security audit reports from installations across the fleet. One report in particular caught her attention. Naval Station Norfolk had experienced a remarkable transformation in security posture after Captain Rachel Vance's 3-month audit. The statistics were impressive. Threat identification up by 47%, false positive detentions down by 62%. Junior personnel reporting confidence in raising concerns increased from 38% to 89%. But what really caught Admiral Vance's attention was a note at the bottom of the report. Captain Vance's methodology of operational immersion and assumption testing has proven more effective than traditional audit procedures. Recommend expanding this approach fleet-wide and developing formal training based on her techniques. The note was signed by the commanding officer of Naval Station Norfolk, who had initially complained loudly about having a retired officer conduct unannounced security tests on his base. Admiral Vance made a note in her calendar. Call Rachel Vance. Discuss promotion to civilian GS-15 position and authorization for expanded audits across all naval installations. Then she added one more note. Remember to have her properly credentialed this time. The Gate 7 incident may have been effective, but let's not have every base commander thinking we're deliberately having their gates arrest our own people. Though privately, she had to admit, Captain Vance's willingness to be arrested, humiliated, and dismissed had taught the entire Navy a lesson about assumptions, verification, and the difference between security theater and actual security. Sometimes the best lessons came from the most uncomfortable experiences, and sometimes the quietest warriors taught the loudest lessons. Captain Rachel Vance had proven both points beyond any doubt. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe for more military and veteran stories. These true tales keep the courage alive for generations to come. And in the comments, tell us where are you watching from, and who's the quiet leader you'll never forget.